Think about the last history book you picked up. Within its pages, you likely found a confident narrative of events, a clear timeline of causes and effects that explained how we got to where we are today. But what if I told you that narrative is full of holes? What if some of the most pivotal, fascinating chapters of our collective story don't have a neat ending? Instead, they simply end with a question mark, a silent challenge thrown down across centuries to anyone brave enough to seek an answer. History, it turns out, is not a completed puzzle but a living, breathing mystery. And it's in these gaps, these shadows where the official record fades, that our most compelling stories are waiting to be told. That sense of wonder, that pull towards the unknown, is exactly what we're exploring together today. Welcome to a journey into the heart of uncertainty, a voyage through 50 of the most captivating unexplained historical events that continue to baffle the greatest minds of our time. We are not just talking about simple cold cases or minor curiosities. We are delving into profound enigmas that challenge the very foundations of what we think we know about human civilization, ancient technology, and even the nature of reality itself. Picture entire cities that vanished without a trace, leaving behind only legends. Consider artifacts crafted with a precision that seems to defy the technological capabilities of their era. And then there are the events, the singular moments in time, that appear to flout all known laws of logic and physics. These are the puzzles that keep historians, archaeologists, and scientists working late into the night, their whiteboards filled with theories that never quite add up. This is the frontier of human knowledge, a place where every new discovery often leads to two new questions. But here is the most thrilling part. This isn't a story confined to the past. These are not dead mysteries locked away in dusty archives. Each one of these enigmas represents an active investigation. Even now, with satellite technology and advanced scientific tools, we are still uncovering clues, still debating possibilities, and still getting surprised by what we find. This video is your invitation to step into that world of discovery. It's a chance to look over the shoulders of modern-day explorers and feel the same spark of curiosity that drives them. We will traverse the globe and span millennia, from the depths of the ocean to the remotest deserts, in search of answers that have eluded us for generations. So get comfortable and open your mind, because we are about to dive deep into the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time, where every story is a reminder that the past still has secrets to reveal. Our journey into the unknown begins not in a dense jungle or a deep desert, but on the windswept shores of what is now North Carolina. Here, in the year 1587, a group of about 117 English men, women, and children established the Roanoke Colony. It was a bold venture, an attempt to create the first permanent English settlement in the New World. The governor of this fledgling community was John White, an artist and mapmaker who sailed back to England later that same year to secure more supplies and support for the colonists he left behind. His plan was for a quick turnaround, but history had other ideas. A major naval war between England and Spain broke out, and every available ship was pressed into service to fight the Spanish Armada. This conflict trapped Governor White in England for 3 long, agonizing years. You can only imagine the growing dread he must have felt with each passing month, knowing the vulnerable group he had left behind was running out of time. When he finally managed to return in the summer of 1590, he stepped onto the silent shore to a scene that has become the stuff of legend. The settlement was empty. Not a soul remained. There were no signs of a struggle, no graves, and no indication of a hasty flight. The houses and fortifications had been carefully dismantled, suggesting a planned and orderly departure. It was as if the entire population had simply vanished into the thin coastal air. The only clue left behind was a single word carved into a wooden post, CROATOAN. And on a nearby tree, the letters CRO were found. This was not a random scrawl, it was a specific message. before he left, Governor White had arranged a contingency plan with the colonists. If they were forced to leave, they were to carve a Maltese cross into a tree to signal they were in danger. There was no cross. The word CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and also the name of the Native American tribe that lived there. It seemed like a clear signal, a direction to follow. So why is this still a mystery centuries later? The simplest theory is that the colonists, facing starvation and harsh conditions, integrated with the friendly Croatan people. This is a compelling idea, and later reports from other English settlers in the Jamestown area decades later spoke of indigenous people with grey eyes who spoke English and claimed to have ancestors who could talk from a book. Yet, despite these tantalizing stories, no conclusive archaeological evidence has ever been found on Hatteras Island to definitively prove a large group of English settlers lived and died there. Other theories suggest the colony was wiped out by a disease, but the lack of bodies contradicts this. Perhaps they were attacked by the Spanish, who viewed the English settlement as a threat, but Spanish records from the time show no knowledge of such an attack. Some even propose a more desperate scenario, that the colonists attempted to sail back to England in a small ship and were lost at sea. The enduring power of the Roanoke mystery lies in that single cryptic word. It is a clue that seems to point the way, yet the path it leads down remains shrouded in the mists of time, a ghost story that marks the very beginning of American history. From the silent shores of the New World, we now venture into the vast, unpredictable expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, where another mystery unfolded that would become the very definition of a ghost ship. It was December 4, 1872. The Canadian merchant brigantine Dei Gratia was sailing steadily when its crew spotted another ship about 400 miles off the coast of Portugal. The vessel was moving erratically, yawing in the wind, a clear sign that no one was at the helm. As they drew closer, Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gratia recognized the ship. It was the Mary Celeste, which had set sail from New York with a cargo of denatured alcohol bound for Genoa a full month before he had. Something was terribly wrong. After hailing the ship and receiving no response, a boarding party was sent over. What they discovered aboard the Mary Celeste was an enigma so perfect it has captivated the world for over a century. The scene was one of profound and unsettling tranquility. The ship was perfectly seaworthy, its hull sound and its cargo of over 1,700 barrels of alcohol largely intact. There was a 6-month supply of food and fresh water in the stores. Yet the crew of 10 people, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, were gone without a trace. It was as if they had simply evaporated. In the captain's cabin, breakfast dishes were still on the table. Personal belongings, including the captain's watch and his wife's sewing machine, were left undisturbed. The ship's logbook was found, with the last entry dated 10 days earlier, placing the ship calmly within sight of the Azores. There was no evidence of a struggle, no signs of violence, and most puzzling of all, the single lifeboat was missing. It appeared the crew had abandoned a perfectly sound ship voluntarily, but for a reason that has never been determined. Theories attempting to explain the fate of the Mary Celeste's crew are as numerous as they are conflicting. One of the most persistent involves the cargo. The denatured alcohol in the hold could have produced fumes that built up pressure. Perhaps the captain, fearing an imminent explosion, ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a temporary safety measure tethered to the ship. A sudden gust of wind could have then snapped the line, leaving the lifeboat to drift away while the Mary Celeste sailed on, the feared explosion never actually happening. Others point to the possibility of a seaquake, an underwater seismic event that could have caused a loud, terrifying noise and shaken the ship violently, convincing everyone that the vessel was breaking apart and necessitating a panicked evacuation. Then there are the more dramatic suggestions of piracy or mutiny. But piracy makes little sense when valuable personal items were left behind, and a mutiny is hard to square with the orderly state of the ship and the respected reputation of Captain Briggs. What makes the Mary Celeste so endlessly fascinating is that every theory contains a fatal flaw. If it was an alcohol vapor explosion, why were the barrels found sealed and intact? If it was a seaquake, why was there no structural damage to the ship? The mutiny and piracy theories fail to explain the complete absence of any violent struggle. Even the official inquiry at the time could reach no firm conclusion. The mystery was later muddied by sensationalized accounts and outright fictionalizations, like the famous story of finding a half-eaten meal still warm on the table, a detail entirely invented by a writer named Arthur Conan Doyle. This layering of myth over fact only deepens the puzzle. The Mary Celeste represents a moment of perfect, rational decision-making based on a perceived immediate threat. A threat that, for reasons we will never know, turned out to be an illusion, leading to a tragic and irreversible choice in the middle of an empty ocean. While the silent mystery of the Mary Celeste plays out on the open sea, our next enigma is contained within the pages of a book, a volume so perplexing that it has defied every attempt to read a single word. Imagine holding a book that looks undeniably old, filled with detailed illustrations of plants that have never been identified, charts of celestial bodies that don't match any known constellations, and hundreds of pages of text written in a script that is completely unknown to every linguist and cryptographer who has ever examined it. This is the reality of the Voynich Manuscript, a book that has been called the most mysterious manuscript in the world. Its vellum pages have been carbon dated to the early 15th century, placing its creation in the Renaissance, a time of burgeoning knowledge and exploration. Yet its contents remain an impenetrable fortress of secrets. The manuscript's modern story begins in 1912, when a rare book dealer named Wilfred Voynich purchased it from a Jesuit college in Italy. He was captivated by its sheer strangeness and devoted his life to trying to unlock its secrets, but the book's history stretches back much further. A letter found with the manuscript, dated 1666, indicates it was once owned by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who allegedly purchased it for 600 gold ducats, a massive sum, suggesting he believed it to be the work of the renowned 13th century scholar Roger Bacon. For centuries, it passed through the hands of alchemists, scholars, and emperors, each presumably hoping to be the one to crack its code, and each failing. So, what exactly is inside? The manuscript is divided into sections that we can only interpret based on the images. One section is a herbal, with page after page of exquisite, strange botanical drawings. These plants, however, do not correspond to any species on Earth. They seem to be fantastical hybrids with roots that look like organs and leaves with impossible structures. Another section contains astronomical or astrological diagrams, showing circular drawings of the sun, moon, and stars in formations that are not recognizable to modern astronomers. There are also sections that appear to be biological, featuring intricate drawings of tiny, naked women bathing in interconnected, elaborate plumbing systems, and a final section that is simply page after page of text, broken only by small stars in the margins. The text itself is the heart of the mystery. It is written in an elegant, flowing script from left to right, with what appear to be words and sentences. It has all the statistical properties of a real language, with word frequency and patterns that mimic natural linguistic structures, but it is a language without a key, a cipher without a solution. The theories about its origin are as varied as they are contentious. The hoax theory suggests that Voynich himself or a previous owner created an elaborate forgery to sell a worthless book for a fortune. However, the carbon dating to the 1400s seems to rule out Voynich as the creator, and the complexity and consistency of the text, which shows patterns that would be incredibly difficult to fabricate without computers, make a medieval hoax seem unlikely. Another prominent idea is that it is an encoded text, perhaps containing valuable alchemical or scientific secrets that its author wanted to hide. The problem is that all attempts to apply standard code-breaking techniques, including those used by modern intelligence agencies, have failed. Some argue it is written in a known language but using a unique, invented alphabet. Proposals have ranged from a distorted form of Latin or Hebrew to a rare dialect of Chinese, but none have yielded a coherent translation. A more radical theory posits that it is glossolalia, meaningless, automatic writing, produced in a trance state, perhaps by a spiritualist. Yet, the strong linguistic patterns detected by computers argue against this, suggesting there is a genuine underlying structure. Modern technology has only deepened the mystery. Computerized analysis in the 21st century has confirmed that the text does follow Zipf's law, a linguistic principle seen in all human languages where the most frequent word appears roughly twice as often as the second most frequent word, and so on. This is incredibly difficult to fake and strongly implies the manuscript contains a real language or a very sophisticated cipher. However, artificial intelligence algorithms designed to decode ancient languages have so far produced no definitive results, sometimes generating a few words of seeming Latin or Hebrew but never a continuous, meaningful text. The Voynich Manuscript stands as a silent challenge, a beautiful, intricate puzzle from a time we thought we understood. It is a reminder that the past can hold onto its secrets with a tenacity that defies all our modern tools, leaving us to wonder if we are looking at a work of genius, an elaborate joke, or the sole surviving artifact of a worldview that has been completely lost to time. From the pages of an unreadable book, we now turn to a physical object, a lump of corroded bronze and wood that lay forgotten on the ocean floor for 2,000 years, only to utterly reshape our understanding of ancient technological prowess. The story begins not in a library, but in the clear blue waters off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in the year 1901. A group of sponge divers seeking refuge from a storm stumbled upon the silty remains of an ancient Roman-era shipwreck. As they descended, they found a breathtaking scene, marble and bronze statues littering the seafloor along with coins, glassware, and other treasures. Among these artifacts, one piece seemed utterly unremarkable, a heavily corroded, lumpy bundle of bronze about the size of a large book. It was retrieved with the rest of the haul and for years sat in a museum storage room in Athens, its true nature completely overlooked. It appeared to be little more than a piece of worthless rock, its intricate internal mechanisms hidden beneath centuries of seabed incrustation. It was only when the corrosion cracked away years later that a museum employee noticed something extraordinary. Peering out from the broken crust were the faint, precise outlines of gear wheels. This was not a statue or a simple ornament, it was a machine. Thus began the painstaking, multi-generational investigation into what we now call the Antikythera Mechanism. For decades, researchers used X-rays and later, advanced three-dimensional X-ray tomography to peer inside the calcified layers without destroying the fragile fragments. What they revealed was nothing short of astonishing. The mechanism was not just a simple calendar. It was an incredibly sophisticated, hand-powered, analog computer of a complexity that would not be seen again until the elaborate astronomical clocks of 18th century Europe. It consisted of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precisely machined and mounted within a wooden frame, with dials on the front and back covered with intricate Greek inscriptions. So, what did this ancient computer do? Its purpose was to model the cosmos. By turning a hand crank on the side, an operator could advance the mechanism through time, and on its various dials they could watch the movements of the sun, the moon, and likely the 5 known planets. It could predict lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and it even accounted for the moon's slightly irregular orbit using a clever pin and slot device that mimicked this subtle variation. One of its most fascinating features was a dial that showed the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. This was not merely a scientific instrument. It was a masterpiece of engineering that connected celestial mechanics with the cultural and athletic heartbeat of the Greek world. It represented a depth of understanding about the universe that historians had never before attributed to the ancient world. This is where the profound mystery takes hold. The ship carrying the mechanism is believed to have sunk around 60 or 70 years before the Common Era, and the device itself was probably constructed sometime between 200 and 100 years before that. We have no record of such a device in any surviving ancient text, not a single whisper from the great philosophers or historians. The knowledge required to build it, a deep grasp of astronomy, advanced mathematics, and precision metalworking, seems to have vanished from the historical record for over 1,000 years. The great question is, who built it? The leading candidate is the school of thought connected to the legendary mathematician Archimedes, who lived in Syracuse a century before the mechanism was made. Ancient writings tell us Archimedes built complex planetariums, though none survive. Was the Antikythera Mechanism a descendant of his groundbreaking work? Or was it the product of a forgotten workshop of geniuses on the island of Rhodes, a known center for astronomy and mechanics? We simply do not know. The mechanism forces us to confront a startling possibility, that the technological and scientific path of human civilization is not a straight upward line. It suggests that peaks of knowledge can be reached, only to be lost to war, social collapse, or simply the fragility of record-keeping. The existence of the Antikythera Mechanism implies that this level of sophisticated mechanical engineering was not a one-off fluke, but likely part of a tradition. There must have been craftsmen who knew how to make these gears, philosophers who provided the astronomical data, and a clientele wealthy and educated enough to want such a device. And yet, all of it disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only this one incredible survivor, a ghost from a future that the ancient world almost had, only to have it slip back beneath the waves for centuries. Yet from the sophisticated gears of the Antikythera Mechanism, a device that speaks to a peak of knowledge, we travel to a story of societal collapse, a community that thrived for centuries on the edge of the known world only to vanish completely. On the stark, beautiful coast of Greenland, the Norse established a foothold that was nothing short of miraculous. It was the famed Viking explorer Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for murder, who first sailed west and found a land of fjords and meadows. With a marketer's flair, he named it Greenland to attract settlers, and around the year 985 he succeeded. Several hundred Norse men and women followed him, establishing what became known as the Eastern Settlement, and later a smaller Western settlement further up the coast. This was not a temporary outpost, it was a full-fledged society. They built stone churches, including a cathedral in the settlement of Gardar, established farms that raised cattle and sheep, and maintained a regular trade with Europe, exporting valuable goods like walrus ivory, tusks, and furs in exchange for essential items like iron, timber, and glass. For over 400 years, this community persisted, a testament to Norse resilience. Church records from the early 14th century show the settlement was significant enough to warrant its own bishop. This was a functioning, organized European Christian society on the very frontier of the Arctic, and then it was gone. By the mid-15th century, silence had fallen over the Norse settlements of Greenland. When a Norwegian ship finally managed to land on the coast around the year 1540, expecting to find their kin, they discovered only abandoned farms, empty stone structures, and a profound stillness. There were no bodies, no signs of a final, cataclysmic battle. It was as if the entire population had simply walked away from their lives, leaving behind a mystery that has puzzled historians for centuries. How does an entire civilization, one that had weathered so much for so long, simply disappear? The most prominent theory points to a dramatic shift in the environment, a force the Norse were ultimately unable to withstand. Beginning in the 14th century, the climate of the North Atlantic began to cool significantly, a period now known as the Little Ice Age. Summers grew shorter and cooler, winters longer and more brutal. This had a devastating impact on a society whose economy and survival were deeply tied to agriculture. The growing season became too short to reliably raise hay to feed their livestock through the winter. Sea ice increased, blocking the crucial shipping lanes to Iceland and Norway for longer periods, isolating the Greenland Norse both economically and culturally. They were trapped, slowly starving on their failing farms as the world they knew grew colder and more hostile. Evidence from ice cores and studies of animal bones found at Norse sites supports this, showing a clear trend towards a harsher climate coinciding with the settlement's decline. But climate change alone may not tell the whole story. Another compelling theory suggests an economic collapse. The primary export of the Greenland Norse was walrus ivory, a luxury good highly valued in medieval Europe. However, by the 14th and 15th centuries, the opening of trade routes to Africa and Asia began to flood the European market with elephant ivory, which was often of higher quality and easier to obtain. The market for the smaller, more labor-intensive walrus tusks likely collapsed, stripping the Greenland settlements of their main source of wealth and their ability to import the vital goods they could not produce themselves. Without this economic engine, the society may have slowly withered, losing the resources needed to sustain its population in such a marginal environment. A third, more troubling theory involves contact, or rather, a failure of contact with the indigenous Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit. As the Norse were struggling, the Thule culture, superbly adapted to the Arctic environment with advanced hunting technologies like large skin boats and harpoons, were expanding eastward across Greenland. Archaeological evidence shows the two groups were certainly aware of each other. Norse artifacts have been found at Inuit sites and vice versa. The nature of their interaction, however, is a subject of intense debate. Were the relations peaceful, involving trade, or did they turn hostile with competition over scarce hunting grounds leading to conflict? Some speculate that the Norse, clinging to their European identity and perhaps viewing the Inuit as inferior, refused to adopt the survival strategies of their neighbors, such as hunting ringed seals from the ice in winter, a skill that could have saved them. It is possible that skirmishes, or simply the pressure of competing for resources, delivered the final blow to the already weakened Norse settlements. So why is the mystery still unresolved? The evidence is frustratingly fragmentary. There is no smoking gun, no mass grave or burnt fortress that points to a single catastrophic event. The leading theory today is a confluence of factors, a perfect storm of environmental pressure, economic irrelevance, and perhaps social isolation. The Norse were not passive victims. They clearly adapted for generations, but their adaptations may have reached a limit. They failed to fully integrate with the Inuit, who thrived in the very same conditions. They remained dependent on a European trade network that eventually forgot about them. The final fate of the last Norse Greenlanders is the deepest part of the mystery. Did they slowly die out where they stood, the last families succumbing to malnutrition and disease in the long darkness of an Arctic winter? Or did they make a desperate attempt to sail back to Iceland only to be lost at sea? Some intriguing, though inconclusive, evidence suggests a few may have been absorbed into Inuit communities. The silence of the abandoned stone farms is a haunting reminder of the fragility of even the most resilient societies when faced with interconnected challenges, a lesson from the past that resonates with a particular urgency today. Now, let us travel from the silent, cold collapse of the Norse in Greenland to a scene of frenzied, terrifying life in the heart of medieval Europe. The year is 1518, and the city of Strasbourg is a place of tension. Located in the Holy Roman Empire, the city has been suffering through a devastating series of famines, with crop failures leading to widespread hunger and malnutrition. Diseases like smallpox and syphilis are rampant, and the general population lives in a state of deep anxiety and spiritual dread. It is into this pressure cooker of fear and suffering that one of the most bizarre and unsettling events in recorded history erupts. It began, according to historical records, in mid-July. A woman named Frau Trophia stepped into a narrow street and without any music or apparent reason began to dance. This was not a joyful expression, it was a compulsive, frantic, and uncontrollable convulsion of movement. She danced for hours alone in the dust, her body refusing to obey her will. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, she slept briefly, only to resume her desperate jig upon waking. This continued for days. The local authorities, initially perplexed, diagnosed her condition as a case of hot blood, a supposed ailment caused by an overheated body and mind. Their prescribed cure, in a decision that would have catastrophic consequences, was more dancing. Believing that the only way to burn off the bad blood was to dance it out, they cleared a public square, hired musicians, and even brought in professional dancers to encourage her. Instead of curing Frau Trophia, this official sanction acted like a spark in a tinderbox. Within a week, more than 30 other people had joined her in the square, gripped by the same irresistible compulsion. The number soon swelled to over 400. The scene was no longer one of mere curiosity but of sheer horror. These people danced day and night, their faces contorted in agony, their feet bleeding, their bodies slamming into each other in a writhing mass of humanity. They did not stop to eat or drink sufficiently. Contemporary accounts describe them screaming for help, begging for mercy from the torment that possessed their limbs. The local chronicles report that, at the peak of the plague, as many as 15 people a day were dying from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer physical exhaustion. The dancing had become a plague in its own right, a literal dance of death. Faced with a crisis that their initial solution had only worsened, the city fathers reversed their strategy. They banned music and public gatherings, declaring the dancing a sin and a manifestation of divine wrath. They eventually organized a pious procession to a nearby grotto dedicated to Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and actors, whom they believed had cursed the city. Yet, the event remains a profound mystery. What could have caused hundreds of people to dance themselves to death? The most widely discussed scientific explanation is mass psychogenic illness, formerly known as mass hysteria. This is a phenomenon where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms within a group. The people of Strasbourg were living under extreme duress, starving, sick, and deeply religious. Their collective anxiety, the theory suggests, found a physical outlet in this dancing mania, a shared psychological breakdown triggered by the sight of the first dancer. It became a contagious form of social illness where the fear and suggestion were enough to override conscious control of the body. This theory is supported by similar, though less extreme, cases throughout history. Another prominent theory points to a biological cause, ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, a staple grain of the medieval diet. When ingested, it can cause powerful convulsions, spasms, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in the limbs, symptoms that could be misinterpreted as an uncontrollable urge to dance. The famine conditions in Strasbourg would have made the population more likely to eat spoiled or fungus-ridden grain. While ergotism, known historically as St. Anthony's fire, typically causes gangrene and painful burning sensations, the psychoactive components of the fungus could theoretically induce the erratic behavior witnessed. However, critics of this theory note that ergot poisoning usually leads to incapacitation and paralysis rather than sustained, coordinated physical exertion over days. Perhaps the most compelling explanation is not a single cause but a perfect storm of all these factors. A population weakened by hunger and terrified by disease consumed bread contaminated with a mild neurotoxin. This biological trigger, combined with the powerful psychological suggestion of seeing a neighbor in the grips of a strange affliction, and amplified by the authorities' initial disastrous encouragement, could have created a feedback loop of hysterical contagion that swept through the city's most vulnerable citizens. The dancing plague of 1518 stands as a terrifying anomaly because it sits at the crossroads of biology, psychology, and sociology. It is a stark reminder of the powerful and sometimes terrifying connection between the mind and the body, and of how easily a community under immense strain can unravel in ways that defy simple explanation. Leaving behind the collective hysteria of medieval Europe, we encounter a phenomenon that is deeply personal, isolating, and strikingly modern. For a select group of people around the world, the mystery is not something to be seen in an old manuscript or an archaeological dig, but something they hear every single day of their lives. It is known as the Taos hum, named for the small, artsy town of Taos, New Mexico, where it was first systematically studied in the 1990s. But this enigmatic sound is not unique to Taos. Similar persistent, low-frequency hums have been reported in places as far-flung as Bristol in England, Windsor in Canada, and Largs in Scotland. Those who can perceive it, a group often called hearers, describe it as a distant diesel engine idling, a low rumble just at the edge of hearing that never, ever turns off. It's a sound that is completely inaudible to the vast majority of people, even those standing right next to a hearer, which makes the experience profoundly frustrating and alienating. The impact of the hum on those who perceive it is far from trivial. While some may initially brush it off as a minor annoyance, for many it becomes a source of significant distress. The constant, invasive noise can lead to chronic sleep deprivation, an inability to concentrate, debilitating headaches, and even feelings of nausea. The very nature of the sound, its persistence, and its invisibility to others often leads to social isolation and a sense of being dismissed as delusional. One hearer famously told a researcher, "It's a torture. It's there in the quiet moments when you're trying to read a book or fall asleep. It's like a vibration inside your own head that you can't escape." This personal testimony underscores that this is not an abstract puzzle. For those affected, it is a real and intrusive part of their daily reality. The mystery of the Taos hum gained enough public attention that it prompted official investigations. In the early 1990s, a team of researchers from the University of New Mexico and physicists from the nearby Los Alamos National Laboratory were tasked with getting to the bottom of the phenomenon. They arrived in Taos with sensitive audio equipment, determined to capture the sound and identify its source. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, only deepened the enigma. Their sophisticated microphones detected nothing unusual. There was no anomalous acoustic signal in the environment that correlated with the experiences described by the hearers. Later, a study commissioned by the United States Congress, which had been petitioned by frustrated residents, also failed to pinpoint a physical source for the sound. This failure to find an external cause has led to a wide range of competing theories, which generally fall into two broad categories. The first set of ideas proposes that the hum is a real, physical sound, but one that is either very localized or emitted at a frequency or volume that makes it difficult to detect with standard equipment. Suggestions have included industrial equipment, such as powerful air compressors or electrical substations, whose low-frequency vibrations might travel for miles through the ground or the air. Others have looked to geological causes like microseismic activity, tiny, constant rumblings from deep within the Earth's crust that could be translated by certain people into an audible sensation. There is even a more fringe theory involving very low-frequency radio waves used for communication with submarines, which some speculate could, under specific atmospheric conditions, be converted into sound. The second, and perhaps more scientifically compelling, category of theories points inward to the human body itself. A leading hypothesis is that the hum is a form of objective tinnitus. Unlike most tinnitus, which is a subjective ringing or buzzing heard only by the individual, the proponents of this theory suggest that the hum could be the perception of a real, internal bodily sound. This could be the result of spontaneous autocaustic emissions, where the cochlea in the inner ear actually generates its own faint sounds, which most people's brains successfully filter out. For hearers, this natural internal noise might be amplified and perceived as an external hum. This theory is supported by the fact that some hearers report the sound is louder indoors or when lying with their head on a pillow, conditions that would amplify internal bodily sounds. Another biological theory suggests that hearers simply possess a heightened sensitivity to very low-frequency sounds, allowing them to perceive a background rumble of the modern world from highway traffic miles away to industrial HVAC systems. That falls below the hearing threshold of most people. What makes the Tao's hum so perplexing is that no single theory provides a complete and satisfying explanation. If it were simple industrial noise, why can't sophisticated audio equipment detect it consistently? If it were a common form of tinnitus, why do the reports cluster so specifically in certain geographic locations? The hum exists in a frustrating gray area between the objective and the subjective, a phenomenon defined by the personal experience of the hearer in the absence of any verifiable physical evidence. It challenges our understanding of human perception itself, forcing us to ask whether the source of the mystery is out in the world, or within the intricate and still not fully understood machinery of the human ear and brain. For the hearers, the search for an answer continues, a quest for validation for a sound that, for them, is as real as the ground beneath their feet. While the Tao's hum represents a mystery of perception, a faint sound on the edge of hearing, our next enigma is defined by its stunning clarity and overwhelming power, a signal that screamed across the cosmos for a brief, unforgettable moment. It was a quiet night in August of 1977 at Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope. This massive instrument, sprawling across a field, was part of the fledgling Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or SETI, program, patiently scanning the sky for any sign that we are not alone in the universe. The work was methodical and painstaking. The telescope's receivers recorded vast amounts of data onto long, continuous printouts, filled with columns of numbers and letters that represented the faint radio whispers of space. These printouts were reviewed days later by a dedicated volunteer, an astronomer and Christian minister named Jerry Amon. For the most part, his work was a lesson in patience, sifting through endless lines of background static. But on August 15th, as he pored over the data from a few nights prior, his routine was shattered. His eyes locked onto a sequence of characters that made no sense. The telescope's system used an alphanumeric code to represent signal intensity, with values from 1 to 9, and then continuing with letters from A to Z for stronger signals. What Amon saw was a string of characters so intense it leapt off the page, 6EQUJ5. The central value, U, was off the charts, representing a signal 30 times stronger than the ambient noise of deep space. It was a narrowband signal concentrated on the specific frequency of 1420 MHz, which is significant because that frequency is part of a protected water-hole band, a quiet region of the radio spectrum that scientists had theorized would be an ideal channel for interstellar communication. Furthermore, the signal's intensity rose and fell over a precise 72-second interval, exactly the duration expected for a signal from a fixed point in space as it drifted into the telescope's stationary field of view and then out again. Every characteristic pointed to a source far beyond our world. Stunned, Jerry Amon grabbed a red pen and circled the alphanumeric sequence. Next to it, he wrote 3 letters that would immortalize the event: WOW. The WOW signal was and remains the most compelling candidate for a potential extraterrestrial transmission ever detected. Its profile was perfect. It was not a repeating signal like those from pulsars, nor was it a wide-band blast that could be explained by natural cosmic events. Its narrowband nature strongly suggests an engineered signal, a focused beacon. The fact that it appeared in a strategically quiet frequency band seemed like more than a coincidence. and perhaps most tellingly, it came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, a region densely packed with stars near the center of our own Milky Way galaxy, a place where many scientists speculate intelligent life could have arisen. For that brief window of 72 seconds, it seemed as if the Big Ear telescope had inadvertently tuned into a cosmic broadcast, a message intended for someone or perhaps for everyone. The mystery, of course, is that the message was never repeated. The immediate, electrifying discovery prompted astronomers to point every available radio telescope they could at that same patch of sky, hoping to hear the signal again. They listened for decades. They searched with more powerful equipment, with more sensitive receivers. They scanned the same frequency and a wide range around it. The result has been a profound and enduring silence. The signal never returned. This failure to require the signal is the central pillar of the mystery. If it was a deliberate broadcast from an extraterrestrial civilization, why was it so brief? Was it a one-time beacon sweeping through the galaxy like a lighthouse beam that momentarily illuminated Earth? Or was it a message meant for another target that we simply happened to intercept by chance? The possibility that it was a secret military transmission or a reflection of space debris has been largely ruled out, as no known human technology at the time matched its specific characteristics. The most persistent natural explanation involves comets. In 2017, an astronomer proposed that the signal could have been caused by the hydrogen clouds surrounding two comets, known as 266P/Christensen and 335P/Gibbs, which happened to be in the exact area of the sky at that exact time. The idea is that these vast clouds of hydrogen could have emitted a strong signal at the 1420 MHz frequency. However, this theory has been widely criticized. Subsequent analysis showed that the comets were not actually in the telescope's beam at the precise moment of the detection, and the nature of hydrogen emission from comets is not thought to produce such an intense narrowband signal. The comet explanation, while creative, has failed to convince most astronomers, leaving the WOW signal in a category of its own. Its legacy is one of tantalizing possibility. It stands as a single, brilliant data point in the otherwise empty graph of our search for cosmic company. It is the event that proves, if nothing else, that the universe is capable of producing signals that perfectly match our expectations for an intelligent transmission. Jerry Amon himself remained cautiously optimistic but skeptical throughout his life, always emphasizing that an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence, and a signal that cannot be verified cannot be confirmed. Yet, the WOW signal continues to capture the public imagination because it represents the ultimate what if. It is the ghost of a conversation that might have been, a voice that called out once from the darkness and then fell silent, leaving us to wonder if we were ever truly alone, even for just 72 seconds. From the silent, cosmic mystery of the WOW signal, we now turn our attention to an object small enough to hold in your hands, yet one that sparks a debate just as vast. In the basement of the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad sits a collection of the most unassuming artifacts, a few small terracotta pots, each about the size of a fist. They look utterly ordinary, the kind of vessels you might expect to have held spices or oils, but it is what was found inside them that has ignited a controversy challenging our perception of ancient technological sophistication. These objects, known collectively as the Baghdad Battery, were discovered in 1936 during excavations at a 2,000-year-old site near the city of Qujat-Rabu, dating from the Parthian period, around 200 years before the Common Era to 200 years after. Along with the pots, archaeologists uncovered a rolled copper sheet formed into a cylinder and an iron rod, both of which showed signs of having been sealed at the top with an asphalt or bitumen plug. The arrangement was too specific, too deliberate to be a coincidence. The moment of revelation came not in the field, but years later, when a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig, who was working at the museum, examined the artifacts more closely. He noticed something peculiar. The iron rod was suspended perfectly within the copper cylinder, and both were insulated from each other by the asphalt stopper. To anyone with a basic knowledge of chemistry, this configuration is instantly familiar. It is the fundamental design of a simple electrochemical cell. The hypothesis was breathtaking. If the pot were filled with an acidic liquid, such as vinegar or grape juice, the electrolyte would interact with the two different metals, causing electrons to flow from the iron rod to the copper cylinder through the acid, thereby generating a small but measurable electric current. Experiments with modern replicas have confirmed that this setup is entirely feasible, producing a voltage of around 1 to 2 volts. It's not enough to power a light bulb, but it is a genuine, functioning battery, predating the invention of the modern voltaic pile by Alessandro Volta in the year 1800 by nearly 2 millennia. This discovery immediately raises a profound and tantalizing question. If this was an ancient battery, what on earth was it used for? The most popular and compelling theory involves electroplating. The process of gilding or silvering objects by using a mild electric current to transfer a thin layer of precious metal from a source to a less valuable object was a known practice in the ancient world. Artisans in Mesopotamia were renowned for their intricate gold and silver work, and some artifacts from the region show a level of plating so fine and even that it seems difficult to achieve without some form of electrochemical assistance. A series of these Baghdad batteries connected together to create a higher voltage could have provided just enough power to facilitate this delicate process. This theory transforms our view of ancient craftsmen from skilled artisans into proto-scientists, quietly harnessing the principles of chemistry in their workshops. Another fascinating, though more speculative, idea points to a medical or mystical application. Ancient texts from various cultures, including those from Greece and China, describe the use of electric fish, like the torpedo ray, to administer shocks for pain relief, a practice known as electrotherapy. Is it so hard to imagine that a Persian or Mesopotamian physician might have used a controlled, mild current from one of these cells to treat muscle pain, or even to create a tingling sensation for religious or ceremonial purposes? The sensation of a low-voltage current could have been interpreted as a divine force or a vital energy, making the battery a tool not of industry but of healing or spiritual connection. This theory suggests a lost chapter in the history of medicine, where electricity was understood not as a force of nature to be tamed, but as a subtle power to be harnessed for the body. However, not all historians are convinced by these electrifying possibilities. The skeptical viewpoint offers a much more mundane explanation. These objects, they argue, were nothing more than secure storage containers for precious religious or magical scrolls. The scrolls, likely made of perishable materials like papyrus or parchment, would have been rolled up and inserted into the copper cylinder. The iron rod might have been a simple handle for pulling the scroll out. The asphalt plug would have served to seal the vessel, protecting the sacred texts from moisture and insects. In this interpretation, the fact that the metals react with an acid is purely coincidental, a quirk of material science that happened to align with a future discovery. Proponents of this theory point out that no wires or connectors have ever been found with the batteries, and no contemporary texts from the period make any mention of electrical phenomena or their applications. The true purpose of the Baghdad battery remains one of history's most captivating what-if scenarios. The evidence is frustratingly circumstantial. We have the physical objects which undeniably can function as batteries, but we lack any direct proof that they ever were used as such. The storage jar theory is plausible, but it doesn't fully explain the sophisticated and deliberate isolation of the two different metals. Perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe the vessels were indeed designed for storing scrolls, but an observant artisan noticed that when one became wet with an acidic liquid, it produced a strange tingling sensation or caused a discoloration on a metal object placed inside. This accidental discovery could have then been explored and adapted for a specific, limited purpose that was never widely adopted, its knowledge dying with its practitioners. The Baghdad Battery forces us to confront the limits of archaeological interpretation. It is a ghost of a potential technology, a whisper of a path not taken, leaving us to wonder if we are looking at a practical tool, a sacred object, or the fragmented remains of a spark of genius that flickered briefly in the ancient world before being lost to time. While the Baghdad Battery represents a debate over ancient technology, our next mystery is written in a language we can read, yet its meaning remains stubbornly out of reach. It concerns a scroll unlike any other found among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the Qumran caves between 1946 and 1956. The vast majority of these ancient manuscripts are texts written on fragile parchment or papyrus, preserving religious writings like the Book of Isaiah. But one scroll was different. It was found separately in a more remote cave, and it was made not of perishable skin but of metal, a hybrid of 99% copper and 1% tin. This object, now known as the Copper Scroll, stands apart not just for its material but for its content. While the other scrolls are spiritual libraries, the Copper Scroll reads like a cryptic bank ledger or a treasure map from a time of immense upheaval. The text itself, inscribed onto the metal in a form of Hebrew that differs slightly from the other Dead Sea Scrolls, is a straightforward list. It describes 64 distinct locations where staggering amounts of treasure are supposedly hidden. The inventory is almost unimaginable in its scale. It lists tons of gold and silver, thousands of gold and silver bars, hundreds of precious ritual vessels from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, including incense altars and libation bowls, and even a separate collection of precious documents. The quantities are so vast that if the treasure were real and recovered today, its value would be measured in the billions of dollars. The entries are terse and specific. For example, one instruction translates to, "In the ruin that is in the valley of Acca, under the steps leading to the east 40 cubits, a chest of silver and its vessels." Weight 17 talents. This level of detail gives the scroll an air of undeniable authenticity, as if it were written by a temple treasurer desperate to safeguard his people's most sacred wealth. This leads directly to the central, burning question. Is the Copper Scroll a literal, factual guide to a real fortune, or is it an allegorical text, a piece of religious symbolism? The literalist theory is compelling, especially given the historical context. The scroll is generally dated to a period just before or during the First Jewish-Roman War, around 66 to 70 years of the Common Era. This was a time of catastrophic violence, culminating in the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem by the Roman legions in the year 70. It is entirely plausible that priests, foreseeing the coming devastation, would have taken the immense temple treasury and hidden it in the Judean wilderness to keep it out of Roman hands. The Copper Scroll, then, would be the secret record of that desperate operation, etched into durable metal to survive the ages. The specificity of the locations, mentioning landmarks, pools, and tombs, argues strongly for a real, physical treasure. However, the allegorical theory offers a powerful counter-argument. Scholars who support this view point to several perplexing issues. First, the quantities of precious metals listed are astronomically high, far exceeding what historians believe the temple treasury could have possibly contained. Second, some of the directions are frustratingly vague or refer to places that are difficult to identify with certainty today. Words like the ruin or the dam could apply to hundreds of locations. Furthermore, a few instructions seem almost fantastical, like one that mentions digging under a tower of the salt pans. Could these be coded references to spiritual treasures rather than material ones? In this interpretation, the gold and silver are metaphors for divine wisdom or spiritual rewards, and the act of finding them is an allegory for a religious quest. This view places the Copper Scroll more in line with the other Dead Sea Scrolls as a document of faith, albeit one with a unique and puzzling form. This clash of interpretations has fueled numerous real-world expeditions, all of which have ended in disappointment. Treasure hunters, archaeologists, and even high-tech teams using ground-penetrating radar have scoured the arid landscape around Qumran for decades following the scroll's clues. They have dug at the base of specific ruins, investigated ancient water systems, and explored countless caves, yet not a single piece of the legendary treasure has ever been found. The sheer futility of these searches adds another layer to the mystery. If the treasure was real and hidden so effectively 2,000 years ago, is it possible that it was discovered and looted in antiquity, perhaps by the Romans themselves? Or did the priests who hid it never live to retrieve it, their secret dying with them? The complete lack of any supporting archaeological evidence despite intensive searching certainly lends weight to the allegorical argument. The enduring fascination with the Copper Scroll lies in this perfect tension between the practical and the spiritual. It presents itself with the cold, hard logic of an inventory list, but it delivers a promise that has proven impossible to collect. It is a tangible object that points to an intangible truth, forcing us to decide whether we are reading the meticulous plans of a long-dead treasurer or the poetic vision of a devout community facing annihilation. Perhaps the greatest treasure of the Copper Scroll is not gold or silver, but the relentless curiosity it inspires, a mystery carved in metal that challenges us to separate historical fact from enduring faith. Now, from the coded secrets of a metal scroll, we move to a mystery written on an infinitely larger canvas, one that stretches across the French countryside in the form of thousands of silent, weathered stones. In the small town of Carnac in Brittany, France, lies one of the most extraordinary and extensive megalithic sites in the entire world. Here, spread over several square miles, are over 3,000 prehistoric standing stones, arranged with breathtaking precision into long, parallel rows that march across the landscape like a petrified army. These are the Karnak alignments erected by a Neolithic culture over 5,000 years ago, predating even the Great Pyramids of Giza. The sheer scale of the undertaking is almost incomprehensible. The largest of the alignments, the Menech files, consists of 11 converging rows of stones stretching for over 3,000 feet. Standing amidst them, you are surrounded by a forest of granite, some stones small and squat, others towering over 13 feet high. This was not a haphazard arrangement. The organization and labor required speak to a society with a powerful, unified purpose, a purpose that has been completely lost to time. What could have driven these ancient people to such a monumental effort? The theories are as varied as the stones themselves. The most prominent idea is that the alignment served as a gigantic astronomical observatory or calendar. Some researchers have suggested that the rows are aligned with the rising and setting of the sun and moon at key points in the year, such as the solstices. The stones could have acted as markers, allowing early farmers to track the changing seasons with precision, an essential skill for an agricultural society. Others see a more sacred function, proposing that the avenues formed a ritual processional way, a sacred landscape designed for ceremonies honoring deities of the earth or sky. The presence of burial mounds and dolmens nearby supports the idea that this was a deeply spiritual center, a place where the realms of the living and the dead intersected. A third, more practical theory suggests the stones marked territorial boundaries for different tribes or clans, a permanent and imposing declaration of land ownership. Yet none of these explanations feel entirely sufficient. Why create thousands of stones when a few dozen would have sufficed for a calendar? Why such complex, parallel rows for a simple boundary marker? The true meaning of Karnak remains locked within the granite, a secret kept for millennia. In a fascinating and stark contrast, our next mystery involves a megalithic structure that is decidedly modern, yet its secrets are almost as well guarded as those of its ancient counterparts. In a remote field in Elbert County, Georgia, stood a monument known as the Georgia Guidestones. Erected in 1980, this collection of 6 granite slabs, each weighing over 20 tons, was arranged in a star pattern and capped with a massive keystone. What made the Guidestones so remarkable was not their age, but their message. The slabs were inscribed with 10 principles or guidelines for humanity, written in 8 different modern languages, including English, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic, with a shorter message in 4 ancient scripts like Babylonian cuneiform and Classical Greek. The guidelines were a mix of pragmatic and provocative advice, calling for maintaining humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, guiding reproduction wisely, and urging people to avoid petty laws and useless officials. It was a vision for a future, post-apocalyptic world, a set of instructions for rebuilding civilization. The mystery of the Georgia Guidestones begins with its creation. The entire project was commissioned by a man using the pseudonym R.C. Christian, who approached the Elberton Granite Finishing Company with detailed plans and full payment. He claimed to represent a small group of loyal Americans who wished to remain anonymous, and his true identity has never been conclusively revealed. This anonymity fueled endless speculation. Were the Guidestones the work of a secret society like the Rosicrucians, whose symbolism shares similarities with the name R.C. Christian? Were they a manifesto from a survivalist group or a wealthy eccentric with a particular worldview? The monument quickly became a polarizing symbol, hailed by some as a thoughtful blueprint for a sustainable future, and condemned by others as a monument to elitism and depopulation agendas, with its first guideline about a much smaller global population being a particular flashpoint. This modern mystery took a dramatic and violent turn in the early morning hours of July 6, 2022, when an explosive device severely damaged one of the pillars. Later, for safety reasons, the entire structure was dismantled by the county authorities. The destruction added a final, irreversible layer of intrigue. While an individual claimed responsibility for the bombing, citing opposition to the monument's message, the act of its eradication transformed the Guidestones from a controversial landmark into a true historical enigma. Its physical presence is now gone, just like the civilization that built the Karnak stones, leaving behind only photographs, the translated texts, and the unanswered question of who R.C. Christian really was and what he and his group truly intended. The Karnak stones and the Georgia Guidestones, separated by thousands of years, together form a powerful dialogue across time. One is an ancient puzzle whose creators left no written language to explain their motives. The other is a modern puzzle whose creators chose to remain silent. Both stand as testaments to humanity's enduring urge to carve messages in stone, sending whispers of our beliefs, our fears, and our hopes into an uncertain future. From silent stones and modern monuments, we now turn to 2 objects that inspire not just curiosity, but a kind of reverence and fear, artifacts that sit at the very intersection of faith and mystery. The first is perhaps the most famous and controversial religious relic in the world, the Shroud of Turin. This 14-foot-long linen cloth, housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, bears the faint, straw-colored image of a man who appears to have suffered the torturous wounds of crucifixion. The figure shows wounds consistent with the biblical accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus, lacerations on the back, a puncture wound in the side, and marks on the head that could correspond to a crown of thorns. For millions of the faithful, this is not merely an image. It is the actual burial shroud of Christ, a tangible connection to the most pivotal moment in Christian history. The visceral power of the image is undeniable, a silent witness to suffering that has drawn pilgrims for centuries. the central mystery of the shroud is twofold. How was this image created and when? The debate over its authenticity is a perfect microcosm of the eternal conflict between faith and science. In 1988, a pivotal moment seemed to deliver a definitive answer. With the permission of the Vatican, small samples from a corner of the shroud were divided and sent to 3 independent laboratories at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Using radiocarbon dating, a highly reliable scientific method, all 3 labs reached the same startling conclusion. The flax plants used to make the linen had been harvested sometime between the years 1260 and 1390. This placed the shroud's origin firmly in the medieval period, long after the time of Christ. For many scientists, the case was closed. The shroud was an elaborate, if inexplicable, medieval forgery. Yet the mystery refused to die. The problem is that the carbon dating result, while compelling, does not explain the most baffling aspect of the shroud, the image itself. How was it made? The image is not a painting. No pigments, dyes, or brushstrokes have been found on the fibers. It is not a scorch, as the color change is only on the very topmost fibers of the thread. It is, in essence, a perfect three-dimensional negative image, a characteristic that was only discovered in 1898 when amateur photographer Secondo Pia took the first photograph of the shroud and was stunned to see that the negative plate revealed a strikingly clear and detailed positive image. This level of sophistication is unheard of in medieval art. Furthermore, forensic analysis suggests the bloodstains on the cloth are composed of real human hemoglobin, and the pattern of wounds displays a level of anatomical accuracy about Roman crucifixion practices that would have been largely unknown in the 14th century. Skeptics proposing forgery methods, such as using a bas-relief and sunlight or a simple chemical mixture, have been unable to replicate the shroud's unique chemical and physical properties. The debate has led to a stalemate, with some scientists suggesting the sample used for carbon dating might have been contaminated by a fire in the 16th century that damaged the cloth, or that it was a patch woven into the original fabric. The Shroud of Turin, therefore, remains an enigma wrapped in faith, a scientific puzzle that challenges our understanding of both history and artistry, leaving us to wonder if we are looking at a miraculous impression or the work of a forgotten genius whose techniques we still cannot comprehend. From the delicate, mysterious image on a shroud, we journey to a book of monumental size and equally monumental legend. In the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm resides the Codex Gigas, which translates to giant book. It is an apt name. This medieval manuscript is the largest known surviving manuscript from the Middle Ages, weighing a staggering 165 pounds and requiring at least 2 people to lift it. Its massive pages of vellum, made from the skins of approximately 160 donkeys, contain a complete Latin Bible, along with a host of other important texts, including historical chronicles, medical works, and exorcism rites. But the Codex Gigas is not famous merely for its size. It is infamous for the dark legend that clings to it, a story that has earned it its more popular name, the Devil's Bible. According to a 13th century chronicle, the Codex was the work of a single monk from a Benedictine monastery in Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic. This monk had broken his monastic vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive, a horrifying punishment. In his desperation, the monk promised his captors that he would create, in a single night, a book that would contain all human knowledge and bring everlasting glory to the monastery. As midnight approached and he realized the task was impossible, he prayed not to God but to the fallen angel Lucifer, asking Satan to complete the manuscript in exchange for his soul. The legend says the devil himself finished the book, and in gratitude, the monk added a full-page, striking portrait of the devil on page 290, a fearsome image that stares out from the vellum with an almost living intensity. The true mystery of the Codex Gigas, however, lies not in its demonic illustration, but in the analysis of its handwriting. Paleographers, experts in ancient writing, have studied the Codex extensively and reached a startling conclusion. The entire manuscript, from beginning to end, appears to have been penned by a single scribe. The handwriting is remarkably consistent, showing no significant changes in style, pressure, or ink flow that would indicate the work of multiple hands or the passage of many years. Based on the sheer volume of text, it is estimated that writing it all out, even at a rapid pace, would have taken a single person working non-stop at least 20 years. The legend of it being written in one night is physically impossible, but the reality of a single scribe dedicating a significant portion of his life to this one monumental task is, in its own way, just as extraordinary. Who was this scribe? Was he a pious man performing an immense act of devotion, a penitent atoning for a great sin, or simply a monk assigned to a lifelong project? The consistent handwriting suggests a man of immense focus and dedication, a stark contrast to the frantic, doomed figure of the legend. The existence of the Codex Gigas forces us to confront the power of story. The devil legend is a far more compelling explanation for such a massive, uniform book than the reality of a decades-long scholarly grind. It transforms a remarkable feat of human endurance into a supernatural pact. Yet the real story may be just as fascinating. The manuscript's survival through fires, wars, and being looted as a trophy of war by the Swedish army in the 17th century is a testament to its perceived power, whether holy or unholy. Together, the Shroud of Turin and the Codex Gigas represent two sides of the same coin of mystery. One is a physical object whose origin science struggles to pin down, the other a human creation whose creation story has been overtaken by a shadowy myth. They are both powerful reminders that some of history's greatest puzzles are not about what happened, but about what we choose to believe happened and why. While the artifacts we've explored so far hold their mysteries within their physical forms, some of history's most chilling puzzles are not tied to objects, but to places, specific areas on the map that seem to defy the normal rules of reality. These are the legendary triangles, zones where the familiar world appears to thin, and strange events become almost routine. The most famous of these by far is the Bermuda Triangle, a vast section of the western Atlantic Ocean bounded by points in Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. For decades, this region has been synonymous with the unexplained vanishing of ships and aircraft. The legend truly entered the public consciousness after the infamous disappearance of Flight 19 in December of 1945. This was a training flight of 5 United States Navy TBM Avenger bombers, piloted by experienced crews, that vanished during a routine mission. The final radio transmissions from the flight leader were deeply unsettling. He reported that his compasses were malfunctioning, that they were lost, and that the ocean didn't look right. A massive sea and air search was launched, and tragically, one of the search and rescue planes, a PBM Mariner with 13 men aboard, also vanished without a trace. The loss of 6 aircraft and 27 men in a single day with no wreckage ever found cemented the triangle's fearsome reputation. Over the years, the list of alleged incidents grew to include numerous ships, from the 1918 disappearance of the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy coal carrier with over 300 souls, to the eerie discovery of the ghost ship Mary Celeste's lesser-known cousin, the abandoned freighter SS Marine Sulphur Queen in 1963. Yet, when we subject these stories to rigorous scrutiny, many of the myths begin to dissolve. The region is one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes and flight paths in the world, and statistically, the rate of disappearances is not significantly higher than in any other similarly busy area of the ocean. Skeptics, including agencies like the United States Coast Guard and Lloyd's of London, point to very real and dangerous environmental factors. The Bermuda Triangle is prone to sudden, violent storms that can appear with little warning. It is also a region with unique geological features, including deep underwater trenches and large fields of methane hydrates on the seafloor. The theory goes that a sudden release of these methane bubbles could theoretically reduce the water's density enough to cause a ship to lose buoyancy and sink almost instantly. Furthermore, the area is known for complex magnetic anomalies that can indeed disrupt compass readings, making navigation treacherous for those who rely solely on them. So, while the Bermuda Triangle may not be a supernatural vortex, it is a place where a perfect storm of natural hazards, bad weather, navigational challenges, and human error can converge with tragic and mysterious results. Less famous but equally intriguing is the Michigan Triangle, a zone located over the deep, cold waters of Lake Michigan. While a large freshwater lake might seem a less likely setting for high seas mystery, Lake Michigan is a formidable inland sea, subject to its own violent storms and strange phenomena. The most compelling case here is the disappearance of Northwest Airlines Flight 251 in June of 1950. The twin-engine DC-4, carrying 58 people, was on a routine flight from New York to Seattle when it vanished from radar while over the central part of the lake. A massive search turned up only a few bits of floating debris and a fuel tank, but the main wreckage and the bodies of the victims were never recovered. Then there is the strange story of the schooner Rosa Belle. In 1921, the ship was found floating upside down in the lake with no sign of its 11 crew members. The vessel was salvaged, but the mystery only deepened when, just a few years later, the Rosa Belle was discovered capsized again, under different ownership, with its new crew also missing. These events, combined with numerous reports from pilots and sailors of strange lights in the sky and unexplained compass malfunctions over the lake, have built a compelling case for the Michigan Triangle's own unique brand of mystery, suggesting that whatever forces are at work are not confined to the saltwater of the Atlantic. If the first two triangles are maritime mysteries, the third takes us deep into the woods. In the Green Mountains of Vermont lies an area known as the Bennington Triangle, centered on Glastonbury Mountain. This region gained its ominous reputation from a series of 5 unexplained disappearances that occurred between 1945 and 1950. The cases are particularly baffling because they happened in a relatively small, wooded area and involved people who vanished under circumstances that seemed to defy logic. The first was a 74-year-old Midi Rivers, an experienced hunting guide who simply vanished while leading a party back to camp. A massive search found no trace. 2 years later, a college student named Paula Weldon vanished while hiking a well-traveled section of the Long Trail. She was last seen by a group of hikers and simply disappeared around a bend in the path. An extensive search involving hundreds of people and bloodhounds found nothing. Then, in 1950, the case of 8-year-old Paul Jepson added another layer of strangeness. His mother left him playing in a truck for a few minutes while she tended to pigs. When she returned, he was gone. Bloodhounds brought in to track him reportedly picked up a scent, but then lost it abruptly at a specific spot on a nearby road, as if he had been picked up by a vehicle. However, no such vehicle was ever identified. Theories attempting to explain the Bennington Triangle incidents range from the terrestrial to the otherworldly. Some point to the presence of large, predatory animals like bears or mountain lions, though such attacks typically leave evidence. Others suggest that the rugged, swampy terrain could have claimed the victims, with the forest quickly concealing any remains. Yet the sheer number of vanishings in such a small area and the bizarre details, like the bloodhounds losing Paul Jepson's scent on the road, have fueled more speculative ideas. Local Abenaki legends spoke of Glastonbury Mountain as a cursed place, an area to be avoided, and some have wondered if the disappearances are connected to alleged UFO activity reported in the region during that time. The Bennington Triangle lacks the scale of the ocean-based triangles, but its mysteries feel more intimate and perhaps more terrifying because they happened on solid ground, in places where people should have been safe. Together, these three triangles form a powerful pattern of perplexity. They remind us that despite our advanced technology and detailed maps, there are still corners of the world, both on water and on land, that seem to hold onto their secrets with a stubborn grip, suggesting that the map of the known world is still dotted with areas marked, "Here be mysteries." But while these geographic mysteries challenge our understanding of place, our next two events are anchored in specific, terrifying moments in time, both occurring on Russian soil and both presenting destruction so bizarre that straightforward explanations seem to crumble under the weight of the evidence. The first of these is an event of almost biblical power, a cataclysm that shook the remote Siberian wilderness on the morning of June 30th, 1908. In the basin of the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, a nomadic group of the indigenous Evenki people watched as a bluish light, as bright as a second sun, moved across the sky. This was followed by a flash and a series of thunderous roars that knocked people off their feet. The sound wave was recorded by barographs as far away as England. When scientists finally mounted an expedition to the site 19 years later, led by the determined mineralogist Leonid Kulik, they discovered a scene of staggering devastation. 80 million trees lay flattened like matchsticks, radiating outward from a central point over an area of 800 square miles. The force was estimated to be equivalent to 10 to 15 million tons of TNT, nearly 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The enduring mystery of the Tunguska event lies not in the scale of the destruction, which is undeniable, but in the absence of the one thing you would expect to find: a crater. At the epicenter, Kulik found standing, scorched trees, but no significant impact crater and no large pieces of an asteroid or comet. This void at the heart of the devastation is what has fueled scientific debate for over a century. The leading and most widely accepted theory is that the event was caused by the airburst of a stony asteroid or a comet fragment, roughly 200 feet in diameter, entering the Earth's atmosphere at a shallow angle and traveling at supersonic speeds. The incredible heat and pressure generated by its passage through the air would have caused the object to explode several miles above the ground, releasing its immense kinetic energy in a single, devastating shockwave that hammered the forest below without ever actually striking it. This theory neatly explains the radial tree fall pattern and the lack of a crater. However, the precise nature of the object remains uncertain. If it was a stony asteroid, why has no definitive debris ever been found in the peat bogs of the region? If it was an icy comet, it would have left even less residue, but comets typically travel at higher velocities, which could alter the energy calculations. The Tunguska event stands as a stark and humbling warning of the destructive potential of near-Earth objects, a single 100-year-old reminder that our planet exists in a cosmic shooting gallery. From a public cosmic explosion, we turn to a private, intimate tragedy that unfolded in the icy grip of a different Russian mountain range half a century later. In early February of 1959, a rescue team reached a slope known as CROATOAN, or Dead Mountain, in the northern Ural Mountains. They were searching for a group of 9 experienced cross-country skiers and hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov. The group had failed to send a scheduled telegram, and the search party discovered a scene that would become the stuff of nightmare and legend. The Dyatlov Pass incident, named for its leader, is a mystery built not on a single strange fact, but on a cascade of them, each more baffling than the last. The group's tent was found oddly situated on the mountainside, but the true horror was its condition. It had been cut open from the inside, as if the occupants had used their knives to slash their way out in a desperate hurry. The tent was abandoned, but all the hikers' personal belongings, including their warm clothes and boots, were left behind. The bodies of the hikers were discovered in various locations and conditions over the following weeks, and it is the nature of their injuries that transforms this from a simple hiking accident into an enduring enigma. The first two bodies, found near the remains of a small fire, were dressed only in their underwear and had died of hypothermia. 3 more were found between the fire and the tent, also dying from the cold. The final 4 bodies, however, were not discovered until much later, buried under several feet of snow in a ravine. These hikers had suffered catastrophic injuries. One woman was missing her tongue. Several had massive internal trauma and chest fractures comparable to the damage seen in victims of high-speed car crashes, but without any corresponding external wounds. Crucially, an official inquest at the time determined that the fatal injuries were not caused by any kind of human force, stating it would have required an impact similar to being hit by a car. There were no signs of a struggle, and a strange orange tan was reported on some of the skin. The official investigation was closed, attributing the deaths to a compelling natural force, a vague and deeply unsatisfying conclusion. This vacuum of an official explanation has given rise to a sprawling ecosystem of theories. Natural explanations point to a rare and powerful slab avalanche. Proponents argue that the hikers, awakened by the sound of shifting snow, slashed their way out of the tent to escape being buried. They then became separated in the pitch-dark, sub-zero temperatures, with the last 4 succumbing to injuries sustained in a fall into the ravine while trying to find shelter. However, avalanche experts note that the slope was not steep enough for a major avalanche, and no evidence of such an event was recorded at the time. Other theories venture into darker territory. Some suggest an encounter with the indigenous Mansi people turned violent, but there were no tracks or other evidence of another party. More speculative ideas involve infrasound, low-frequency sound waves generated by the wind that can induce feelings of panic and dread, potentially causing the hikers to flee irrationally. Then there are the more extreme suggestions: a secret military weapon test, a confrontation with a Yeti, or even a UFO encounter, fueled by reports from other hikers in the area of strange orange spheres in the sky around the same time. The Dyatlov Pass incident resists a simple solution because it is a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces do not seem to come from the same box. The combination of the hasty, irrational flight from the tent, the bizarre mix of injuries, and the lack of any clear perpetrator creates a narrative void that we are still trying to fill, a hauntingly human mystery set against the indifferent brutality of the Russian winter. While the frozen silence of Dyatlov Pass presents a mystery of nature's brutal indifference, the crimes we now confront are starkly, chillingly human. They are acts of violence that were not meant to be hidden, but were instead accompanied by a calculated, cruel engagement with the public, creating legends of fear that have endured for generations. In the annals of American true crime, few cases loom as large or as persistently frustrating as the 2 we group together now: the taunting terror of the Zodiac Killer and the gruesome, iconic tragedy of the Black Dahlia. The shadow of the Zodiac Killer fell over Northern California in the late 1960s, a specter made real through a series of brutal attacks and, most famously, a torrent of coded letters sent to local newspapers. The confirmed murders began in December of 1968 with the shooting of 2 teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, at a lover's lane near Vallejo. A few months later, another couple, Michael Renault Majow and Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin, were attacked in a similar location. Ferrin was killed, but Majow survived, providing the first description of the assailant. The attacks were terrifying enough, but it was the communication that followed that transformed a local murder investigation into a national obsession. In the summer of 1969, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner each received nearly identical letters. Each contained 1/3 of a 408-symbol cipher that the author claimed held his identity. He demanded the letters be printed on the front page, or he would go on a kill rampage. The newspapers complied, and within days the cipher was solved by a married couple of amateur cryptologists. Yet, the solution was not a name, but a chilling declaration. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. The message was signed with a cross-circle symbol, the signature of the Zodiac. This was only the beginning of a years-long correspondence. The Zodiac claimed responsibility for murders, some confirmed and others unverified, boasting about his prowess and threatening school children. He sent detailed letters describing his crimes, often including bloody pieces of cloth from his victims' clothing as proof of his authenticity. He even created a more complex 340-character cipher that, after 51 years, was finally cracked in 2020 by a team of private citizens. Its solution offered no clear identity, instead revealing a rambling, paranoid text speaking of slaves in paradise and his hope that they would not catch him. The case generated an avalanche of suspects, from a man named Arthur Lee Allen, who was investigated intensely and fit many aspects of the profile, to more recent theories involving individuals with connections to the military or cryptography. Despite the thousands of leads and the killer's own prolific writing, no one has ever been conclusively identified as the Zodiac. The evidence has been re-examined with modern DNA technology, but the results have been inconclusive. The mystery endures because the killer successfully weaponized the media, creating his own mythos and then vanishing into it, a ghost who promised to never be caught and so far has kept his word. Just over 2 decades earlier, another murder captured the nation's horror and imagination, but this time the communication came not from the killer, but from the relentless engine of the press. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a mother walking with her young daughter in a vacant lot in Los Angeles discovered a scene of unimaginable brutality. The body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found posed deliberately, severed completely in half at the waist and drained of blood. Her face was slashed from the corners of her mouth into a grotesque Glasgow smile, and her body showed signs of having been meticulously cleaned. The press, with a luridness that would forever brand the case, dubbed her the Black Dahlia, a nickname playing on her penchant for black clothing and the film, The Blue Dahlia, that was popular at the time. The coverage was frenzied and invasive, fabricating stories about Short's life and turning her into a sensationalized icon, often at the expense of the truth. The investigation into the Black Dahlia murder was massive and almost immediately overwhelmed by false confessions and dead-end leads. The most promising suspect was a man named Dr. George Hill Hodel, a prominent physician with a sophisticated background. Years after the case had gone cold, Hodel's own son, a former LAPD detective, became convinced of his father's guilt based on secretly recorded conversations in which the elder Hodel made cryptic and incriminating statements. The theory posits that Hodel's medical knowledge explains the surgical precision of the mutilations. Other suspects have included a Cleveland salesman, a nightclub owner, and even the infamous murderer known as the Lipstick Killer. Yet, like the Zodiac case, a definitive solution has remained elusive. The sheer brutality of the crime suggests a killer with anatomical knowledge and a deep personal rage. The lack of blood at the scene indicates the murder occurred elsewhere, in a clean room where the killer had total control, pointing to a level of planning and cunning that allowed him to evade one of the largest manhunts in Los Angeles history. What binds these two American mysteries together beyond their unsolved status is the way they were shaped by their interaction with the public sphere. The Zodiac Killer actively courted the media, using it as a stage for his terrifying performance and turning his crimes into an interactive puzzle. The Black Dahlia case, in contrast, was shaped by a media circus that created a myth around the victim, often obscuring the real woman, Elizabeth Short, and complicating the police investigation with a flood of sensationalism and misinformation. One killer communicated directly, the other through the violent poetry of the crime scene itself. Both cases have become foundational stones in the architecture of modern true crime, serving as endless sources of speculation, theory, and a sobering reminder that even in the glare of intense public scrutiny, the darkest secrets can remain hidden, leaving behind only questions and a legacy of sorrow. From the chilling, human-centered mysteries of the unsolved crimes that haunt modern history, we now venture into the realm of pure legend, to kingdoms that may have never existed anywhere but in the human imagination, yet whose allure shaped the course of real-world exploration for centuries. These are the tales of lost realms that captivated philosophers, kings, and mapmakers, beginning with the granddaddy of all lost civilizations, Atlantis. The story of Atlantis does not emerge from some dusty, anonymous folklore. It arrives with a precise and prestigious pedigree laid out in two dialogues by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato around 360 years before the Common Era. In Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes Atlantis not as a myth, but as a historical account passed down through generations. He portrays it as a formidable naval power that lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. This island kingdom was said to be larger than ancient Libya and Asia Minor combined, a utopian society of immense wealth, advanced engineering, and formidable military might. According to Plato, Atlantis attempted to conquer the Mediterranean but was repelled by the brave and virtuous ancestors of the Athenians. And then, in a single terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island sank beneath the waves, vanishing forever into the depths of the ocean. The central, enduring question is this: was Plato inventing a philosophical fable, or was he recording a distorted memory of a real catastrophe? The allegorical interpretation is powerfully persuasive. Plato was first and foremost a philosopher, and the story of Atlantis appears in a dialogue about the ideal state and the nature of society. In this reading, Atlantis is not a real place but a cautionary tale. It represents the archetype of a perfect society that becomes corrupted by its own power and greed, succumbing to hubris and ultimately being destroyed by the gods as a punishment. Its defeat by the Proto-Athenians serves to glorify Plato's own city-state, portraying it as the beacon of virtue that triumphed over arrogant materialism. The sudden, divine destruction is a classic element of Greek morality plays, a dramatic device to underscore a lesson about the dangers of imperial overreach and moral decay. For many scholars, this is the most logical explanation. Atlantis was a brilliant plot device, a fictional empire created to serve a philosophical argument. Yet, the human desire to find a kernel of truth in such a captivating story is irresistible. The most compelling real-world theory connects Atlantis to the catastrophic volcanic eruption of Thera, now the Greek island of Santorini, around the year 1600 before the Common Era. This eruption was one of the largest volcanic events in human history, devastating the sophisticated Minoan civilization that thrived on Thera and nearby Crete. The Minoans were a seafaring power with advanced architecture, including elaborate palace complexes that some compare to Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings of water and land. The eruption would have caused massive earthquakes and tsunamis that could have wiped out Minoan coastal settlements in a single day and night, exactly as Plato described. Proponents of this theory suggest that stories of this disaster were passed down through traders and eventually reached Egypt, where Plato claimed to have heard the tale, becoming the seed for the legend of a lost advanced civilization. The main hurdle for this theory is location. Thera is squarely inside the Mediterranean, while Plato explicitly places Atlantis beyond Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. This discrepancy has led others to search for candidates as far afield as the Bahamas or even Antarctica, though these lack the archaeological evidence that makes the Minoan connection so tantalizing. Atlantis remains the ultimate historical Rorschach test. We see in it what we want to see, a blank canvas upon which we project our fantasies of ancient glory and catastrophic endings. If Atlantis was a philosophical ghost from classical antiquity, the legend of Prester John was a very medieval kind of phantom, one that directly drove the age of exploration. This story first seized the European imagination in the 12th century with the circulation of a mysterious letter, a document that claimed to be from a magnificent Christian king named Prester John. The letter, addressed to the Byzantine emperor, described a kingdom of unimaginable splendor located somewhere in the east, brimming with pearls, gems, and fantastic creatures. Prester John was said to rule over 72 kings, and his palace featured a magic mirror that allowed him to see any part of his domain. Most importantly, he and his subjects were devout Christians. For a Europe engaged in the desperate crusades against Islamic powers, the idea of a powerful Christian ally lurking behind enemy lines was electrifying. It offered hope that the forces of Christendom could envelop their adversaries, turning the tide in a holy war that was not going well. The origins of this myth are likely rooted in fragmented facts and wishful thinking. During the Crusades, European knights would have encountered rumors and stories from Silk Road travelers about Christian communities that did genuinely exist in Asia. These were primarily Nestorian Christians, a sect that had spread eastward for centuries, establishing communities as far as India and China. Tales of a great Christian ruler in the east likely referred to real leaders like the Mongol Khan Togrul, who was himself a Nestorian Christian and was defeated by Genghis Khan in the early 13th century. As Mongol power expanded, European hopes were rekindled. Perhaps these fearsome new conquerors from the east were actually the armies of Prester John coming to aid their Christian brethren. Embassies were sent, most famously by Pope Innocent IV, to make contact with the Mongols and ascertain if their leader was the legendary king. The envoys returned with disappointing news. The Mongols were not Christian and they had no knowledge of Prester John. In fact, they demanded the Pope's submission. But a legend this powerful does not die easily, it simply moves. When Prester John could not be found in Asia, European cartographers and explorers simply relocated his kingdom to the last great unexplored region on their maps, Africa. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the legend became attached to the real Christian kingdom of Ethiopia. Here was an ancient, isolated Christian civilization ruled by a king known as the Priest King of the Indies. When Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama began sailing down the African coast, a key part of their mission was to make contact with Prester John and forge an alliance that would help them outflank the Muslim powers controlling the trade routes to India. The quest for this phantom kingdom directly fueled the voyages that would eventually connect the globe, a testament to the power of a story to manifest real-world consequences. The kingdom of Prester John was a mirage, but it was a mirage that guided men across oceans, proving that sometimes the most powerful forces in history are not empires or armies, but the stories we tell ourselves about the world that lies just beyond the map's edge. But from the phantom kingdoms of myth that drove explorers across continents, we now turn to two legendary treasures that were, by all accounts, very real. Their stories, however, are so shrouded in greed, conflict, and tragedy that they might as well be fables, serving as stark reminders that some fortunes are better left unfound. The first is a masterpiece of such opulence that it was dubbed the eighth wonder of the world, a creation that celebrated light but was ultimately consumed by the darkness of war, the Amber Room. Imagine an entire chamber 17 feet tall and covering over 180 square feet, where every surface glowed with the warm, honeyed light of 6 tons of meticulously carved amber. This wasn't just a collection of panels, it was a breathtaking work of art. The amber, a fossilized tree resin, was backed with gold leaf and inlaid with precious Florentine mosaics, while ornate mirrors and gilded statues reflected and multiplied its radiant beauty. Its construction began in the early 18th century for the King of Prussia, but it was the Russian Tsar Peter the Great who truly coveted it. After a diplomatic visit, the Prussian monarch presented the amber panels to Peter, and they were installed in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, for 2 centuries, the Amber Room was a symbol of Romanov wealth and a highlight for visitors to the palace, a space that seemed to capture and hold sunlight within its golden walls. The room's fate, however, is inextricably linked to the brutal advance of the Nazi war machine during World War II. Recognizing the room's immense value, Soviet curators attempted to disassemble and hide it as German forces approached. But amber is a fragile material, and they discovered that decades of exposure to temperature changes had made the panels too brittle to safely remove. In a desperate attempt to conceal the treasure, they resorted to covering the walls with simple wallpaper. The ruse was pitifully ineffective. In 1941, Nazi soldiers who looted the Catherine Palace immediately saw through the disguise. They dismantled the entire room in a matter of 36 hours, packed the panels into 27 crates, and shipped them to Königsberg Castle in Germany, the ancient capital of East Prussia, where they were put on display as a trophy of war. This is the last confirmed location of the Amber Room. As the war turned against Germany and Königsberg came under heavy Allied bombing, and then a final Soviet assault in 1945, the room vanished from history. The mystery of what happened next has spawned countless theories. The most straightforward explanation is that the room was destroyed in the fierce battle for Königsberg or in the subsequent fire that ravaged the castle. If this is true, one of the world's greatest artistic treasures was reduced to smoke and ash. Yet, the lack of any definitive evidence no large chunks of charred amber have ever been found in the castle ruins has fueled persistent hopes that it survived. Perhaps the crates were moved in the final, chaotic days of the war and hidden in a secret underground bunker or a forgotten salt mine, much like the other looted art the Nazis stored across the Reich. Treasure hunters have searched everywhere from subterranean caverns in Germany to a potential resting place at the bottom of a lagoon. Some even speculate that the room was secretly loaded onto a ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was then sunk by a Soviet submarine, sending the treasure to a watery grave in the Baltic Sea. To this day, despite decades of searching and occasional claims of a breakthrough, the Amber Room remains one of history's most tantalizing and valuable missing artifacts, a ghost of gilded splendor lost in the fog of war. While the Amber Room was a known treasure that disappeared, our next legend is a fortune that may have never been found in the first place, yet its allure has proven just as deadly. Deep in the heart of Arizona's Superstition Mountains lies the myth of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. The story begins not with a Dutchman, but with a family from Mexico. In the 1840s, the Peralta family was allegedly granted a mining concession by the Spanish crown and discovered a fantastically rich vein of gold in these treacherous mountains. The legend says they were ambushed by Apaches while transporting gold back to Mexico, and the mine's location was lost. Decades later, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz, who was often misidentified as the Dutchman, entered the picture. In the 1880s, the elderly Waltz would appear in Phoenix bars, buying drinks with high-quality gold ore and spinning tales of a secret mine so rich that the gold could be pulled from the walls like rocks. On his deathbed in 1891, he supposedly gave a vague, cryptic directions to his caregiver, Julia Thomas, describing a mine hidden in a canyon under the shadow of a distinctive rock formation called the Weaver's Needle. This deathbed confession ignited a gold rush that has never truly ended, and the Superstition Mountains have earned their name. The terrain is a brutal labyrinth of sheer cliffs, scorching temperatures, and hidden ravines. But the real danger has never been just the environment. It is the curse of the gold itself. Since the 1890s, an estimated 200 people have died or vanished while searching for the lost Dutchman's mine. Some fell from cliffs, others succumbed to dehydration, but a significant number met violent ends. Prospectors have been found shot, their campsites ransacked in clear cases of foul play. The mountains became a stage for greed and paranoia, where lone wanderers saw every other seeker as a competitor to be eliminated. The most famous case is that of Adolf Ruth, who disappeared in 1931 while searching with a map he claimed was a genuine Peralta family document. His skull was found months later with 2 bullet holes in it far from his decapitated body. The official cause of death was listed as accidental due to the extreme heat, but the bullet wounds tell a more sinister story. The enduring question, of course, is whether the mine ever existed at all. Geologists point out that while there is gold in the superstitions, the vast mother lode described in the legend is highly unlikely. Skeptics argue that Jacob Waltz was a clever con man who may have been salting his stories with gold ore pilfered from other, smaller claims, creating a legend to secure free room and board in his old age. The mine could be a classic American tall tale, a mirage of wealth born from the desperate optimism of the frontier. Yet, for every skeptic, there is a true believer who points to occasional discoveries of old Spanish-style arrastras, primitive stone devices used to crush ore found deep in the wilderness. These believers are convinced that the Peralta mine was real, and that Waltz did indeed stumble upon its forgotten entrance. The truth may be forever buried under the sun-baked rocks, but the legend's power is undeniable. It is a siren song that continues to draw the hopeful and the desperate into the mountains, a stark contrast to the state-sponsored theft of the Amber Room. One was a known masterpiece lost to global conflict. The other is a phantom of personal greed, a treasure that has claimed far more lives than it could ever have enriched, proving that the most dangerous thing about a lost fortune is often the hope of finding it. From the sun-scorched greed of the lost Dutchman's mine, we shift our focus to an institution built on faith, where a different kind of treasure sparked a mystery that reaches into the very heart of the Vatican. The story of Pope John Paul I begins not with a long reign, but with one of the shortest in papal history. Elected on August 26, 1978, the former Patriarch of Venice, Albino Luciani, was seen as a pastoral, humble figure, a warm contrast to his more formal predecessors. He was dubbed the Smiling Pope for his gentle demeanor, and his chosen name, John Paul, was intended to signal a continuation of the reforming spirit of John XXIII and Paul VI. But just 33 days into his papacy, on the morning of September 28th, the world was stunned by the news that the Pope was dead. The official announcement, delivered by the Vatican, stated that His Holiness had been found deceased in his bed by a nun who had brought his coffee, the victim of an apparent heart attack. The explanation seemed plausible for a 65-year-old man, yet almost immediately, the circumstances surrounding his death began to generate whispers of doubt that would swell into a chorus of suspicion. The mystery of the Humming Abbot, a nickname derived from a cryptic reference in a controversial book, hinges on a series of irregularities that began that morning. The first and most persistent question involves the timeline. According to the Vatican's account, the Pope was discovered around 5:30 in the morning. However, official bulletins were not released for hours, leading to confusion and speculation. More troubling were the details reported by those who first saw the body. The Pope's personal secretary, Father John Maggi, initially stated that he found the Pope sitting up in bed with papers scattered around him as if he had been reading. Yet, the official version later presented described him lying down. Then there was the matter of the embalming. Vatican tradition usually calls for a waiting period before a pope's body is prepared, but in this case, embalming was carried out with unusual haste before a formal autopsy could be performed. This decision prevented an independent medical examination that could have confirmed the cause of death, a move that many outside observers saw as an attempt to obscure the truth. But why would anyone want to harm the smiling Pope? To understand the theories of foul play, one must look at the agenda he was rumored to be pursuing during his brief reign. In the late 1970s, the Vatican Bank was a shadowy institution. entangled in complex financial dealings with figures linked to organized crime and controversial political groups like the Propaganda Do or P2 Masonic Lodge. Pope John Paul I was reportedly preparing a major shake-up. He had received a dossier detailing the bank's alleged improprieties and was said to be planning to dismiss several powerful curial officials, including the head of the Vatican Bank, American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who was deeply enmeshed in the scandalous collapse of the Banco Ambrosiano. The theory, most famously advanced in David Yallop's book, In God's Name, posits that the Pope was poisoned to prevent him from exposing a financial cancer that reached the highest levels of the Church. Supporters of this view point to the fact that no death certificate was ever issued, and the medications found by the Pope's bedside were for a minor ailment, not a serious heart condition. The official narrative of a sudden, natural death, when placed against the backdrop of immense financial and political pressure, feels to many like an incomplete and convenient conclusion. Yet there is a compelling counter-argument that urges a more cautious interpretation. Medical experts note that a sudden fatal heart attack or myocardial infarction can strike anyone regardless of their apparent health, and stress is a known trigger. The immense weight of the papacy, thrust upon a man who was reportedly overwhelmed by the responsibility, could have been a factor all by itself. Furthermore, Vatican traditionalists argue that the idea of assassinating a pope is anathema, an unthinkable act within the walls of the Holy See. They attribute the inconsistencies in the initial reports to the shock and confusion of the moment, a natural human response to a traumatic event. The lack of an autopsy, while suspicious to outsiders, is consistent with long-standing Vatican protocol that views such procedures as a desecration of the papal body. The mystery of Pope John Paul I's death ultimately rests on a fundamental conflict between a simple, tragic medical explanation and a complex, conspiratorial one fueled by the very real and documented corruption that festered within the Vatican Bank. It is a puzzle where faith in institutions clashes with a compelling narrative of crime, leaving us to wonder if we are looking at a straightforward tragedy or one of the most audacious cover-ups of the 20th century. From the hushed marble halls of the Vatican, our next mystery unfolds in the vast, empty silence of space, observed by a solitary sentinel. On September 22, 1979, an American Vela Hotel satellite, designed specifically to monitor the globe for clandestine nuclear weapons tests, was orbiting over the remote South Atlantic. Its sensors, known as bang meters, were calibrated to detect the unique, telltale signature of a nuclear detonation, a double flash. This is a rapid, intense pulse of light, followed a moment later by a second, longer flash as the fireball cools and the shockwave forms. It is a fingerprint that is nearly impossible to mimic with any natural phenomenon. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning Greenwich Mean Time, that is exactly what the satellite saw. The double flash was unmistakable, and its location was pinpointed to a spot roughly between the remote Prince Edward Islands, which are South African territory, and the sub-Antarctic Bouvet Island. The event became known as the Vela Incident, and it presented the world with a deeply unsettling question. Had a nuclear weapon just been detonated in secret, and if so, by whom? The initial reaction within the United States intelligence community was alarm. The signal was strong and clear. A secret panel of scientists known as the Ruina Panel was convened to investigate the reading. After a lengthy analysis, they presented a controversial conclusion. The double flash was likely not from a nuclear explosion, but was probably caused by the satellite's sensors being triggered by a micrometeoroid impact or the reflection of sunlight off a piece of space debris. This official explanation, however, has been fiercely contested ever since. Critics point out that the Vela satellites had detected 41 previous double flashes, every single one of which was subsequently confirmed to be a nuclear test. The odds of this being the first and only false positive in the system's history seemed statistically remote. Furthermore, in the days following the incident, a powerful, anomalous hydroacoustic signal was detected by listening stations thousands of miles away, a signal consistent with a large underwater explosion. Even more tellingly, the U.S. Air Force sent specially equipped WC-135 weather reconnaissance planes to the area, and they reportedly collected air samples that contained unusually high levels of certain radioactive isotopes like iodine-131, which are short-lived fission products indicative of a recent nuclear event. If a bomb was tested, the identity of the perpetrator is the second layer of the mystery. The two primary suspects have always been Israel and South Africa, who are known to have a close, secretive military relationship at the time, particularly regarding nuclear technology. South Africa was under an international arms embargo due to its apartheid policies, and Israel, while widely believed to possess nuclear weapons, maintained a policy of nuclear ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying its arsenal. A joint test in such a remote location would have served both nations' interests. South Africa could have proven its nuclear capability, and Israel could have secretly tested a new, more advanced thermonuclear weapon design without triggering a direct confrontation with the United States or the Soviet Union. Over the years, former high-ranking officials from both countries have made tantalizing, though never fully confirmed, statements hinting at their involvement. A senior South African naval officer once claimed that his ships were ordered to stay clear of the area, and an Israeli nuclear technician named Mordechai Vanunu, who later revealed details of Israel's nuclear program, suggested the test was indeed an Israeli-South African collaboration. The Vela incident remains a critical cold case of the nuclear age because it sits at the dangerous intersection of technology, geopolitics, and denial. The official U.S. government stance of a zoo event, a fluke of nature, has never fully quieted the doubts. The evidence, while circumstantial, is compelling. The unique double flash, the radioactive fallout, the hydroacoustic data, and the clear motive of the suspected nations. It represents a moment when the fragile system of nuclear monitoring, designed to keep the world safe, may have captured a blatant violation of international treaties, only for the evidence to be muddied by political expediency. Unlike the personal tragedy of a pope's death, the Vela incident is a global mystery, a ghost signal from the deep South Atlantic that forces us to confront the unsettling possibility that the nuclear genie may have slipped out of the bottle in secret, leaving behind only a disputed satellite reading and a legacy of unanswered questions about what really happens in the world's most remote corners. Yet from the shadowy intrigue of state secrets and phantom nuclear tests, we return to the unforgiving power of the sea, where two of maritime history's most haunting disappearances unfold. These are not tales of ships vanishing in legendary triangles, but of expeditions and guardians who were swallowed by the vast, cold wilderness of the ocean, leaving behind clues that only deepen the mystery. The first of these begins with the height of Victorian ambition. In May of 1845, the British Royal Navy launched its most technologically advanced expedition to conquer the final great challenge of exploration, the Northwest Passage. Led by the experienced 60-year-old Sir John Franklin, the mission consisted of two massive, state-of-the-art vessels, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These were not mere sailing ships, they were reinforced with iron plating, equipped with steam-driven screw propellers, and stocked with a 3-year supply of provisions, including thousands of canned goods. With 129 officers and crew, they represented the pinnacle of imperial confidence, expected to map the final leg of a trade route across the top of North America. After being sighted by two whaling ships in Baffin Bay in late July, the entire expedition vanished from the known world. For years, the fate of Franklin's men was the greatest mystery of the age. Dozens of search parties were dispatched, spurred on by Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, and a substantial reward offered by the Admiralty. Slowly, through encounters with local Inuit hunters and the grim discoveries of search parties, a horrific story began to emerge. The ships had become trapped in the vicious pack ice near King William Island. The crews, it seemed, had abandoned the vessels in a desperate attempt to trek south to the mainland. Along the barren coast, searchers found skeletons, some showing signs of cut marks, and a single, chilling note left in a stone cairn. Dated April 25, 1848, it reported that Franklin had died the previous year and that the survivors were abandoning the ships to their fate. The note ended with the words, "And start on tomorrow, 26th for Back's Fish River." It was the last communication from the lost expedition. For over a century and a half, the wrecks of Erebus and Terror themselves remained elusive, the final pieces of the puzzle lying hidden on the ocean floor. The mystery, however, was far from solved. The modern era of archaeology has brought the tragedy into shocking new focus. The wrecks of both ships were finally discovered in 2014 and 2016, respectively, lying at the bottom of the Arctic waters in remarkably preserved condition. But it is the forensic analysis of the few remains found on land that has rewritten the narrative. Autopsies on the well-preserved bodies of 3 crewmen buried early in the expedition on Beechey Island revealed staggeringly high levels of lead in their systems. The source was almost certainly the expedition's own provisions. The canned food, soldered with lead, was slowly poisoning the men, leading to debilitating symptoms like fatigue, paralysis, and mental deterioration. This poisoning, combined with the brutal onset of scurvy from a lack of fresh food, would have crippled the crew's ability to think clearly and survive in the harsh environment. This explains the haunting Inuit accounts passed down for generations, which described groups of disoriented, sickly men dragging sleds south, and most disturbingly spoke of evidence of cannibalism among the last survivors. Cut marks on bones found on King William Island confirm this final, desperate act. The Franklin expedition mystery has thus evolved from a simple story of ships lost to the ice into a complex tragedy of technological hubris, where the very supplies meant to sustain the crew likely contributed to their horrific end. In a stark and eerie parallel, a much smaller but equally unsettling disappearance occurred more than half a century later, far from the Arctic ice but in another place of absolute isolation. On the remote, storm-battered Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland stood a lighthouse, a solitary beacon for passing ships. In December of 1900, a routine relief vessel, the steamer Hesperus, approached the islands to rotate the 3 keepers, James Jucat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. As the ship drew near, the crew was met with an unsettling silence. No flag was flying, and no one came out to greet them. The lighthouse captain sounded the ship's horn and sent up a flare but received no response. A boarding party was sent to investigate, and what they found on the barren island has become the stuff of enduring legend. The main gate and the door to the living quarters were both closed but unlocked. Inside, the clock on the wall had stopped. A chair was lying on its side, as if knocked over in a hurry. Most eerily of all, the table was set for a meal that had never been eaten, and the logbook contained an unfinished entry. The final log entry, made by the keeper Thomas Marshall, noted severe winds on the afternoon of December 15th, the last day the lighthouse lamp had been lit. But the mystery deepens with the log's last words, which reported that the storm had passed and that the 3 men had been praying. This entry, however, was contradicted by the captain of the Hesperus, who stated that the last entry was simply a routine weather report with no mention of prayer. The official investigation concluded that the men must have been caught by a freak wave while attending to equipment on the West Landing, which showed significant storm damage. The theory suggests that 1 man was swept away, a second went to his aid and was also lost, and the third, following lighthouse protocol to the letter, would have then gone to attempt a rescue, resulting in all 3 being pulled into the raging sea. It is a tragically plausible explanation for a profession defined by duty and camaraderie. Yet the official story fails to satisfy completely, leaving room for more speculative ideas. If the men were swept away, why were their oilskins, their essential waterproof coats, left behind in the lighthouse? This detail suggests they were not prepared to go outside into the storm. The overturned chair hints at a sudden, panicked reaction to something seen or heard inside the lighthouse itself. This has fueled more imaginative theories, from a fight that led to all three men falling from the cliffs, to supernatural suggestions involving sea monsters or alien abduction, myths that were eagerly embraced by a public fascinated by the story's Gothic elements. The enduring power of the Flannan Isles mystery lies in its domestic stillness. Unlike the Franklin tragedy, which unfolded over years and involved a slow, agonizing collapse, the lighthouse keeper's disappearance was instantaneous. It is a snapshot of an interrupted life, a table set for a dinner that would never come, a silent testament to the vulnerability of even the most steadfast guardians when faced with the unpredictable fury of the natural world. Together, these two maritime enigmas bookend the age of exploration and industry. One was a massive national endeavor that ended in a slow-motion catastrophe of poison and desperation. The other was a small, routine operation that vanished in a single, silent moment. Both remind us that the sea keeps its secrets well, and that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are not about what we find, but about the profound and utter silence that is left behind. From the silent, frozen graves of the Arctic and the storm-lashed rocks of the Flannan Isles, we now turn to mysteries preserved not by ice or salt water, but by the unique chemistry of the Earth itself. These are the stories written on human skin, the tales told by bodies that refuse to decay, offering us a hauntingly intimate window into lives lived thousands of years ago. Our journey into this realm of preserved history begins in the wetlands of northern Europe, where the discovery of a body is rarely just a discovery, it is an encounter with a violent past. Across the peat bogs of Ireland, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands, hundreds of ancient corpses have been unearthed, often by peat cutters whose sharp spades slice through time to reveal a shocking secret. These are the bog bodies, and their state of preservation is nothing short of miraculous. The cold, acidic, oxygen-poor environment of the bogs acts as a remarkable tanning agent, turning skin to leather and bones to a soft, pliable consistency. But it is the circumstances of their deaths that make these finds so profoundly unsettling. Take, for example, the Tollund man, discovered in Denmark in 1950. When he was found, he looked so peaceful, so recent, that the police were initially called to the scene, believing they were investigating a modern murder. He lay curled on his side, a faint smile on his lips, a leather cap upon his head. A braided leather noose was still tight around his neck, the very tool used to hang him. Yet the detail that truly captivates archaeologists is what was in his stomach. Analysis of his last meal revealed a simple porridge made of barley, flax, and other seeds, a meal consumed 12 to 24 hours before his death. This was not a feast fit for a king, it was the humble fare of a commoner. Then there is the Lindo man, found in an English bog in 1984. His death was a brutal, multi-stage execution. He was struck on the head, garroted with a sinew cord, and his throat was cut, all before being placed face down in the water. The violence is explicit, deliberate, and ritualistic. This pattern of violent, often overkill death is the central enigma of the bog bodies. Who were these people, and why were they killed in such a manner? The theories form a triangle of grim possibilities. The first suggests they were criminals or social outcasts executed for their transgressions. In the harsh societies of the Iron Age, capital punishment was a reality, and the bogs, as liminal spaces between land and water, might have been considered suitable dumping grounds for those denied a proper burial. The second, and perhaps most widely accepted theory, is that they were human sacrifices offered to the gods. The ancient Celtic and Germanic peoples believed the bogs were sacred, gateways to the divine. A life given to the bog was a gift to appease a deity, perhaps to ensure a good harvest, a victory in battle, or to placate the gods during a time of famine or disease. The noose around Toland man's neck might not have been a tool of mere execution, but an offering to a god of fertility, a sacrifice meant to ensure the land's continued bounty. The third theory posits that they could have been victims of a darker form of justice, perhaps kings or chieftains who failed in their duties and were ritually killed as a consequence. The overkill scene in Lindoman could be interpreted as a way to ensure his spirit could not return to seek vengeance. The truth likely varies from body to body, but the overwhelming evidence points to a world where life was cheap and death was a tool used to communicate with the supernatural. While the bog bodies present a mystery of ritual and violence in Iron Age Europe, a discovery on the other side of the world presents a mystery of identity and migration that rewrites chapters of ancient history. Far from the damp, green bogs in the scorching, arid Tarim Basin of western China, archaeologists made a discovery that stopped them in their tracks. Beginning in the 1990s, excavations at sites like Zairo and Karakhol revealed hundreds of mummies naturally preserved by the dry desert air. Their clothing was exquisite, their felt hats and woolen cloaks still vibrant, but it was their faces that caused a sensation. These individuals, dating back as far as 4,000 years, had strikingly European features, long noses, deep-set eyes, and light-colored hair. One of the most famous, the so-called Beauty of Zairo, was a young woman with fine facial features and delicate eyelashes buried with an elegant felt hat. Another, the Chechen man, stood over 6 feet tall and wore sophisticated clothing, including purple and red wool garments that would not have been out of place in Bronze Age Europe. The existence of these remarkably preserved Caucasoid mummies in the heart of Asia was a historical shockwave. For a long time, the prevailing narrative held that Eastern Central Asia was culturally and genetically isolated until much later, with Han Chinese influence expanding westward. The Tarim mummies exploded this idea. Here was definitive proof that people of Western descent were living, thriving, and developing complex cultures in what is now China, a millennium before the earliest evidence of the Silk Road. They were not just passing traders. The cemeteries show centuries of continuous use, indicating a stable, settled population. The artifacts buried with them bundles of ephedra, a medicinal plant, wheat and barley grains, and beautifully crafted woven baskets painted a picture of a sophisticated society with knowledge of agriculture and textiles. The great debate ignited by these mummies is a simple but profound one. Where did they come from? One major theory, supported by early genetic studies, suggested they were the descendants of migrating pastoralists from the steppes of southern Siberia, perhaps related to the Yamnaya culture, who swept across Eurasia on horseback. Another theory proposed an origin even further west, linking them to ancient nomadic groups from the Caucasus Mountains. However, a groundbreaking genetic study published in 2021 provided a stunning new answer. By analyzing the DNA of the oldest mummies, researchers found that they were not the result of a recent, long-distance migration from the West after all. Instead, they were a direct remnant of a deeply ancient population, the ancient North Eurasians. This was a hunter-gatherer people who thrived during the last ice age and largely disappeared, but whose genetic legacy is found in Native Americans and, it turns out, in the Tarim Basin. These people had been living in isolation in this region for thousands of years, a distinct pocket of humanity that had developed its own unique culture. They were not recent migrants, they were a local people with ancient roots, a lost branch of the human family tree. The significance of the Tarim mummies, therefore, has shifted. They are no longer just evidence of early long-distance contact. They are a testament to the incredible diversity and complexity of prehistoric populations. They challenge the very idea of static, monolithic ancient cultures and force us to redraw our mental maps of the ancient world. The bog bodies of Europe show us the brutal, intimate details of individual deaths, forcing us to confront the spiritual beliefs of our ancestors. The Tarim mummies, by contrast, show us the vast, unexpected movements and survivals of entire peoples, reminding us that the human story is far more interconnected and surprising than we ever imagined. One mystery is written in the violence done to a single body. The other is written in the collective DNA of a forgotten civilization. But while the bodies of the past can tell us stories through their physical form, the most direct messages from ancient cultures come from their written words. That is, of course, if we can read them. Our next two mysteries take us from preserved flesh to the enduring fragility of language itself, presenting us with texts that have stubbornly resisted all attempts at translation, locking away the secrets of lost civilizations. The first of these is an object of such peculiar beauty and isolation that it almost feels like an artifact from another world, the Phaistos disc. Discovered in the ancient Minoan palace of Phaistos on the Greek island of Crete in 1908, this fired clay disc is roughly the size of a small plate. Its surface is covered on both sides with a continuous spiral of strange, intricate symbols, each one pressed into the clay with a seal, making it one of the earliest examples of movable type printing in human history. And herein lies the first layer of the mystery. This technology of stamped symbols wouldn't appear again in Europe for another 3,000 years. Why was it used for this one object and then seemingly abandoned? The 242 symbols are arranged into 61 groups, separated by incised lines, suggesting they may represent words or phrases. The symbols themselves are a captivating mix of recognizable figures and abstract designs. Human heads with elaborate feather headdresses, running men, ships, animals like fish and birds, and various tools and plants. It looks undeniably like a script, a systematic form of writing, yet it stands completely alone. No other artifact bearing these symbols has ever been found on Crete or anywhere else in the world. This isolation is the core of the decipherment problem. Without a longer text, or better yet, a Rosetta Stone type of translation key with a known language, cryptographers are essentially working in the dark. They have no context, no way to determine the language the script is meant to represent. Was it an early form of Greek, a language related to the still undeciphered linear, a script also found on Crete? Or was it a foreign tongue, perhaps a diplomatic message or a religious text from a distant land that found its way to the palace? Theories about its purpose are as varied as the symbols. Some scholars believe it is a religious hymn or a prayer, given the repetitive nature of some symbol sequences. Others argue it could be a legal document, a list of geographic locations, or even an early board game. The fact that it was found in a basement room of the palace, along with other clay tablets written in Linear A, suggests it was considered important, but its true function remains a guess. The Phaistos disc is a masterpiece of ambiguity. It presents all the evidence of a written message, carefully crafted and preserved, but without a single clue to its actual meaning. It is a locked door from the brilliant Minoan civilization, and we have yet to find the key. From the solitary mystery of a single disc in the Mediterranean, we travel to one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, where another script was discovered that holds the potential to unlock an equally grand mystery. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is famous for its enigmatic moai, the massive stone heads that stare inland from the coast. But the island holds a second, perhaps even more profound puzzle, the Rongorongo script. Unlike the Phaistos disc, Rongorongo is not a single object but a system of glyphs found carved onto 24 surviving wooden tablets, staffs, and ceremonial ornaments. The glyphs are beautifully intricate, depicting stylized human figures, birds, fish, plants, and geometric shapes, arranged in a unique pattern called reverse boustrophedon. This means the text is read from left to right on one line. Then the tablet is turned 180 degrees to read the next line, also from left to right, so the characters themselves appear upside down relative to each other. The tragedy of Rongorongo is that its meaning was lost almost entirely due to external contact. According to oral history, the script was sacred, known only to a small class of elite priests or chiefs. When European slave raiders attacked the island in the 1860s, they captured or killed most of the island's leading men, including those who could read and write the script. By the time the first serious researchers arrived, there was no one left who could provide a full translation. A few elders recalled that the tablets were chanted during ceremonial occasions, suggesting they contained religious chants, genealogies, or historical narratives, but the knowledge was fragmentary and ultimately lost. This has led to a fundamental and heated debate among linguists. Is Rongo-Rongo a true writing system, capable of representing a full spoken language, or is it something else? Some researchers point to the structured, linear arrangement of the glyphs and argue it has all the hallmarks of a logosyllabic script, where symbols can represent both whole words and syllables. If this is true, then these tablets could be the library of Easter Island, containing the lost history of how the Rapa Nui people settled the island, built the moe, and eventually experienced the ecological collapse that defines their later history. The potential for unlocking this narrative is immense. However, a compelling counter-argument suggests that Rongo-Rongo might be a form of proto-writing, specifically a memory aid device. In this view, the glyphs did not encode the specific words of a text, but rather served as prompts for a reciter who had already memorized the content. The carvings would trigger the memory of a chant or a story, but the exact wording could vary with each performance. This would explain why early attempts to get different islanders to read the same tablet resulted in different interpretations. The glyphs might represent concepts or story beats rather than phonetic sounds. The pairing of the Phaistos disc and Rongo-Rongo offers a poignant lesson in the fragility of knowledge. One is an isolated artifact, a message from a culture we know well in other ways, but whose specific meaning is lost because the script itself is unique. The other is a full script from a culture we desperately want to understand, but its meaning is lost because the people who held the key were wiped out. One mystery is about a single message, the other is about an entire civilization's voice. Together, they represent the silent screams of history, reminding us that writing alone is not enough to preserve a thought. It requires a living chain of understanding, a chain that can be broken all too easily by the passage of time or the cruelty of events. Yet from the silent scripts of lost languages, we now step into a world of palpable fear, where mysteries are not carved in clay or wood, but are written in the actions of terrified communities and the brutal finality of an unsolved crime. Our journey takes us first to a small, tense community in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, a place where fear became a contagion more deadly than any plague. The year was 1692, and the village of Salem was a pressure cooker of social friction, religious paranoia, and generational conflict. The Puritan worldview was one of constant spiritual warfare, where the devil was a very real presence, constantly working to corrupt the faithful. It was into this environment that a strange affliction struck the daughter and niece of the local minister, Samuel Parris. 9-year-old Betty Parris and her 11-year-old cousin Abigail Williams began to exhibit bizarre symptoms. They contorted their bodies into impossible positions, hid under furniture, uttered strange sounds, and complained of being pinched and pricked by invisible forces. When a local doctor could find no physical ailment, he delivered the terrifying diagnosis that would set a fatal chain of events in motion. The girls, he declared, were under an evil hand. They were bewitched. The ensuing panic, which we now know as the Salem witch trials, quickly spiraled far beyond childish hysterics. Other young women in the community began to display similar fits, and under intense pressure, they began to name their tormentors. The first 3 accused were societal outliers: Tutuba, the Parris family's enslaved woman from the Caribbean; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar known for her muttering; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who had engaged in a legal dispute with the Putnam family, one of the most powerful in the village. Tituba's Confession, a fantastical tale of red rats and a tall man from Boston who demanded she sign the devil's book, poured gasoline on the fire. It confirmed the villagers' deepest fears of a satanic conspiracy in their midst. The legal proceedings that followed were a travesty of justice. The court, presided over by judges who fully believed in the reality of witchcraft, allowed spectral evidence testimony that the accused person's ghostly shape had appeared to the victim as proof of guilt. To protest innocence was futile. To confess and name others was the only path to survival. Neighbor turned against neighbor, old grudges were settled with accusations, and the jails began to fill. By the time the governor finally halted the trials in May of 1693, 19 people had been hanged on Gallows Hill. One man was pressed to death with heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea, and at least 5 others had died in prison. The great mystery of Salem is not what happened, but why it happened with such ferocity and why it ended there. What was the precise trigger that transformed a few girls' afflictions into a community-wide meltdown? One of the most compelling scientific theories points to a biological culprit, ergot poisoning. As we discussed with the dancing plague, the fungus Claviceps purpurea, which grows on damp rye, produces alkaloids that are powerful neurotoxins. The symptoms of convulsive ergotism include muscle spasms, crawling sensations on the skin, vomiting, and hallucinations. A list that matches the descriptions of the fits experienced by the afflicted girls. The weather patterns in Salem in 1691 were cool and moist, ideal for ergot growth, and the community's diet was heavily dependent on rye. If the Paris family's grain supply was contaminated, it could explain the very real physical suffering that initiated the crisis. However, this theory has its critics. Ergot poisoning is typically a community-wide affliction, not one that selectively targets a handful of individuals. Furthermore, it doesn't explain why the accusations followed such specific social fault lines, primarily targeting women who are already on the margins of society or who held property that their accusers might covet. This leads to the powerful social explanation. Salem Village was deeply divided between a more traditional, agrarian faction and a wealthier, commercially oriented faction based in Salem town. There were also simmering conflicts between families, like the influential Putnams and the Porters, and a pervasive anxiety about the fading of the original Puritan zeal. In this context, the witch trials provided a brutal mechanism for resolving social tensions. Accusing a neighbor of witchcraft was a way to eliminate a personal enemy, seize land, or reassert traditional religious authority in the face of a changing world. The fact that the accusations began to creep upward, eventually targeting respected figures like the former Minister George Burroughs and the wife of the governor, is likely what finally spurred the authorities to put a stop to the proceedings. The horror had begun to threaten the powerful. The Salem witch trials stand as a timeless warning about the dangers of mass hysteria, the toxic combination of religious extremism and social insecurity, and the terrifying speed at which a community can devour itself when fear overpowers reason. From the collective hysteria of a whole community, we now turn to a crime of intimate, isolated horror, a mystery contained within the walls of a single remote farmstead. 6 years after the end of the First World War, in the quiet German countryside of Bavaria, the Gruber family lived and worked on a farm called Hinterkaifeck. The household consisted of Andreas Gruber and his wife Casilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and her 2 children, 7-year-old Casilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Also living with them was the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived just that day to replace the previous maid who had quit abruptly, complaining that the farm was haunted. These 6 souls were the only people on the property on the evening of March 31, 1922. What happened to them that night is a crime so brutal and bizarre that it has become one of Germany's most infamous unsolved murders. The horror was discovered days later after neighbors noticed the family had not been seen. When they arrived at the farm, they found a scene of unimaginable violence. All 6 inhabitants had been killed with a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe, which was found at the scene. The killings were so savage that some of the victims' skulls were crushed. The bodies were discovered in various locations: the older Gruber couple in their barn, Victoria and her children in their beds in the attic, and the maid in her own room. The killer or killers had then remained on the farm for several days. Animals were fed, the cattle were tended to, and food was eaten from the pantry. This chilling detail suggests a perpetrator who was not in a panicked rush but was coldly comfortable on the property, perhaps even enjoying the macabre solitude. The mystery of Hinterkaifeck is deepened by a series of strange events reported by the family in the weeks leading up to the murders. Andreas Gruber had told neighbors about finding a newspaper on the property that he had not purchased. He also mentioned hearing footsteps in the attic and discovering a set of unfamiliar keys. Most ominously, he had spoken of a mysterious man who had been seen lurking near the farm. The previous maid's claim that the place was haunted adds an eerie, psychological layer to the prelude of the crime. Was someone watching the family, studying their routines, and slowly infiltrating their lives before striking? The investigation was hampered by a series of blunders. The crime scene was contaminated by curious onlookers before police could properly secure it, and a heavy snowfall covered any potential footprints or tracks. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed, but none have led to a definitive solution. One line of inquiry focused on Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who had been killed in the war. However, some speculated he may have survived, returned for revenge, or that the killer was the actual father of Victoria's 2-year-old son, Joseph, a paternity that was the subject of local rumor. Another theory points to a deranged neighbor or a passing vagrant. The fact that the killer remained on the farm points to someone who knew the routines of rural life and was not squeamish, perhaps a former soldier hardened by the trenches. The case was officially closed in the 1950s, the files were destroyed, and the farm itself was razed to the ground, as if to erase the memory of the horror. Yet the mystery endures, a stark reminder that the most terrifying puzzles are often those closest to home, where the violence is personal. The clues are mundane, and the truth remains locked away in the silence of the past. But while the horrors of Hinterkaifeck represent a mystery of the common people, the corridors of power have produced their own dark legends of vanished figures, tales where the victims wear crowns and the suspects sit on thrones. These are the enigmas of imprisoned royalty, stories that have fascinated us for centuries precisely because they challenge the official narratives of history, suggesting that behind the glittering facade of monarchy lies a world of brutal secrets. We begin in the absolutist court of the Sun King, Louis XIV of France, a place where the monarch's will was law and dissent was not tolerated. It is here that we encounter one of history's most famous and yet most anonymous prisoners, the man in the Iron Mask. The historical facts are sparse but undeniable. For over 3 decades, from the 1660s to his death in 1703, a prisoner was held in various French fortresses, including the infamous Bastille. His identity was concealed at all costs. He was always forced to wear a mask, which historical documents describe as being made of black velvet, not iron, a detail romanticized later by writers like Voltaire and Alexander Dumas. The mask was not a brutal torture device, but a practical measure to prevent anyone from seeing his face. The prisoner was treated with a strange mixture of severity and deference. He was kept in strict isolation, his guards under orders to kill him if he tried to reveal his identity, yet he was also provided with fine food and clothing, suggesting he was a person of significant rank. The man who knew the secret, the king's minister, took it to his grave. Upon the prisoner's death, everything in his cell was burned, his body buried in an unmarked grave, and all records of his existence were systematically expunged. The French state had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase a man, So who was he? The question has fueled speculation for over 300 years. The most tantalizing theory, popularized by doomers, is that he was the illegitimate older twin brother of Louis XIV. In this scenario, the prisoner's face was so identical to the king's that the mask was necessary to prevent any challenge to the throne. While a dramatic idea, there is no historical evidence that the Queen Mother gave birth to twins, and the logistics of hiding a royal twin seem nearly impossible in a court swarming with courtiers. A more plausible candidate is Eustache Dorger, a valet whose name appears in the prison ledgers. The theory suggests Dorger may have been a low-level servant who inadvertently learned a devastating state secret, perhaps related to the king's involvement in a notorious political scandal known as the Affair of the Poisons, which implicated members of the nobility in black magic and assassination plots. Knowing too much, he was condemned to a living death. Another compelling candidate is General Vivian de Bouillon, who was imprisoned for cowardice after abandoning a siege. A letter from the French war minister explicitly states that Bouillon was to be held incognito, a punishment for his disgrace that would explain the mask and the respectful treatment. The mystery endures because each theory has its flaws. The twin brother theory is the stuff of legend, while the disgraced general or the knowing valet seem almost too mundane to warrant such an extreme, multi-decade effort of concealment. The man in the iron mask remains the ultimate ghost in the machine of absolute monarchy, a blank space where a person should be, forcing us to wonder what secret was so dangerous that a king would bury a man alive in a velvet shroud. From the sealed cells of 17th century France, we travel back 2 centuries earlier to the turbulent England of the Wars of the Roses, a brutal conflict between the houses of York and Lancaster for control of the throne. Here, another royal disappearance occurred, one that was not hidden but was instead a public event that poisoned a king's reign and created a propaganda war that echoes to this day. In the spring of 1483, the 12-year-old King Edward V and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, were living in the Tower of London. This was not yet a notorious prison. It was a royal residence where monarchs traditionally stayed before their coronation. Edward had been placed there under the protection of his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who had been appointed Lord Protector until the boy came of age. But power has a way of corrupting intentions. The Duke moved swiftly to declare the boys illegitimate, arguing that their father's marriage to their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, was invalid. With the path cleared, the Duke of Gloucester crowned himself King Richard III, and as for the princes, they were seen playing in the Tower Gardens less and less frequently throughout the summer of 1483. Then they vanished completely. The prime suspect has always been Richard III. He had the most obvious motive: to eliminate rival claimants to secure his own shaky hold on the throne. The boys were a perpetual threat. As long as they lived, they could become a rallying point for rebellion. Contemporaries certainly believed he was guilty. Just 2 years after their disappearance, when Henry Tudor defeated and killed Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field, one of the first acts of the new King Henry VII was to accuse his predecessor of tyranny and the murder of the princes. This accusation became the official Tudor narrative, immortalized by Shakespeare, who painted Richard as a monstrous hunchbacked villain. However, the case against Richard is almost entirely circumstantial. There is no smoking gun, no death warrant, no contemporary confession. In fact, some historians point out that the princes were also a serious problem for Henry Tudor. By declaring them illegitimate, Richard had actually weakened their claim. But if they were still alive when Henry took the throne, they would have been a far greater threat to him than they were to Richard, as their Yorkist bloodline was stronger than his own. This has led to the controversial theory that it was actually Henry VII who had the boys killed after he became king, and then pinned the crime on the dead Richard to legitimize his own reign. The most dramatic development in the mystery came in the 17th century, workers making repairs to the Tower of London in 1674 discovered a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase leading to the chapel in the White Tower. Inside were the small skeletons of two children. King Charles II, believing these to be the remains of the princes, had them interred in a marble urn in Westminster Abbey. In 1933, the bones were exhumed and examined. The forensic analysis was inconclusive by modern standards, but it suggested the skeletons belonged to children of the right ages. However, without DNA testing, which has never been permitted, their identity cannot be confirmed. The case of the princes in the tower is a historical cold case where the evidence has been hopelessly contaminated by centuries of political spin. It is a classic whodunit where the two main suspects both had powerful motives, and the truth was likely the first casualty of a ruthless struggle for power. Unlike the man in the Iron Mask, whose story is one of absolute secrecy, the tragedy of the princes was a public affair, a disappearance that everyone noticed but no one dared to officially investigate, a silent scandal at the heart of the English court that continues to divide historians and captivate anyone fascinated by the dark price of a crown. But from the shadowy world of royal prisoners and vanished princes, our journey now takes us to a different kind of mystery, one driven not by political intrigue but by the intoxicating lure of buried treasure. Here, the quest is literal, a physical hunt for a fortune that has consumed lives and fortunes for generations. We begin off the coast of Nova Scotia, on a small, unassuming island shrouded in spruce and pine, where a legend was born from a single, curious depression in the soil. The story of Oak Island's so-called money pit starts in 1795, when a teenager named Daniel Maginnis noticed a strange, circular hollow in the ground beneath an old oak tree, with a worn ship's pulley hanging from a branch above it. Convinced he had found evidence of pirate activity, he returned with two friends and began to dig. What they discovered just a few feet down would ignite a treasure hunt that continues to this day, a layer of flagstones not native to the island, and then every 10 feet a platform of sturdy oak logs. This was no natural formation. It was a deep, complex, and deliberately constructed shaft. As decades turned into centuries, the efforts to solve the mystery became increasingly elaborate and perilous. The early excavations revealed layers of charcoal, a substance called putty, and even a mysterious stone tablet inscribed with cryptic symbols. But the true genius or the true madness of the pit revealed itself as diggers went deeper. At around 90 feet, a tragic pattern emerged. Whenever excavators managed to break through a wooden platform, the shaft would suddenly begin to flood with seawater, rising to a level that matched the tide in the nearby ocean. This was no accident. It was a sophisticated booby trap. Explorers realized that the designers of the pit had engineered a series of flood tunnels, ingeniously linked to the sea, designed to protect whatever lay at the bottom from any would-be treasure hunter. The very engineering that made the pit so fascinating also made it nearly impossible to conquer, swallowing millions of dollars in equipment and tragically claiming several lives over the years, including multiple workers who died when a shaft collapsed. So, what could possibly be valuable enough to warrant such an elaborate and deadly security system? The theories are as vast as the excavations themselves. The most romantic idea points to Captain William Kidd or the infamous pirate Blackbeard, suggesting the pit is a giant bank vault for their plundered gold. Others propose it holds the lost treasure of the Spanish Armada or even the missing French crown jewels, but the more ambitious theories venture into the realm of historical conspiracy. Some believe the pit is the final resting place of the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, hidden by the Knights Templar after they fled persecution in Europe and allegedly made their way to North America long before Columbus. Another compelling, though less glamorous, theory suggests the pit is not a treasure vault at all, but a complex natural sinkhole that was later used by British soldiers during the American Revolution or the War of 1812 as a hiding place for military payroll, with the flooding being a coincidental rather than designed feature. The enduring fascination with Oak Island lies in this perfect storm of mystery. The physical evidence of human effort is undeniable, the engineering is brilliant, yet the ultimate purpose remains stubbornly out of reach. A siren song that continues to draw explorers willing to risk everything for the chance to finally answer the question, what lies at the bottom of the money pit? While the Oak Island mystery is a physical, grueling endeavor played out with heavy machinery, our next treasure legend is an intellectual puzzle, a battle of wits fought on the pages of 3 coded messages. In 1885, a pamphlet was published in Lynchburg, Virginia, telling a story that would become the cornerstone of another great American treasure hunt. The pamphlet contained a narrative from a hotel keeper named James B. Ward, who recounted his encounter decades earlier with a mysterious stranger named Thomas J. Beale. According to Ward, Beale and his party of 30 adventurers had discovered a massive fortune of gold and silver while prospecting in the American Southwest around 1820. Needing a secure place to store it, they transported the treasure back to Virginia and buried it in a secret location. Beale then entrusted a locked iron box to the care of Ward's Inn before vanishing, never to be seen again. The box contained 3 sheets of paper covered in numbers 3 ciphers. Beale's letter explained that the first cipher detailed the treasure's location, the second described the treasure itself, and the third listed the rightful heirs. The key to decoding them, Beale claimed, was a specific document that he would later send. That key never arrived, leaving Ward and eventually the world with an apparently unsolvable puzzle. The mystery took a dramatic turn years later when Ward, still in possession of the box, supposedly managed to crack the second cipher. He claimed he realized the numbers corresponded to the words in the Declaration of Independence. By taking the first number on the list and finding the first word of the Declaration, then taking the second number for the second word, and so on, and using the first letter of each corresponding word, a message was revealed. The decoded text described the treasure in staggering detail, thousands of pounds of gold and silver worth tens of millions of dollars today. This success seemed to validate the entire story and offered a method for solving the other 2 ciphers. Surely, the first cipher, which would reveal the location, would be next to fall. Here is where the true enigma of the Beale ciphers begins. Despite using the same Declaration of Independence key and every other major historical document imaginable, no one has ever consistently decoded the first or third cipher. The one message that was solved, describing the treasure, is almost too perfect, its language and detail aligning suspiciously well with the story told in the pamphlet. This has led many reputable cryptographers and the American government's own code-breaking agency, the NSA, to conclude that the Beale ciphers are an elaborate hoax. The skeptics argue that the solved cipher was likely created first, and the entire backstory was woven around it by James B. Ward himself as a clever scheme to sell pamphlets. The fact that the other 2 ciphers resist all attempts at decryption despite the apparent simplicity of the key is the strongest evidence against their authenticity. If it were a genuine code, why would only one of 3 yield so easily? Yet, for the believers, the mystery is too compelling to dismiss. They point out that the Beale ciphers are a type of homophonic cipher where multiple numbers can represent the same letter, making them far more complex than they initially appear. Perhaps Beale used a slightly different version of the Declaration of Independence, one with typographical errors or a unique printing, which would throw off any decoding attempt using the standard text. The possibility that a genuine fortune still lies buried somewhere in Bedford County, Virginia, has fueled countless expeditions with shovels and metal detectors, though none have ever reported a significant discovery. The Beale ciphers and the Oak Island money pit represent 2 sides of the same treasure hunting coin. One is a physical quest, a battle against earth and water, driven by the sheer force of human determination. The other is a cerebral challenge, a battle against numbers and logic, a locked-room mystery on a continental scale. One promises a tangible reward of gold and jewels. The other offers the ultimate prize for a puzzle solver, the sheer satisfaction of having cracked an unbreakable code. Both, however, share the same powerful allure, the irresistible idea that an incredible secret is waiting just beneath the surface, if only we are smart enough or persistent enough to find it. But while the search for hidden treasure can become a lifelong obsession, some of history's most painful mysteries involve a loss that is immediate and personal, the vanishing of loved ones under circumstances that defy all logic and leave behind a void of unanswered questions that can haunt families for generations. Two such cases, separated by nearly 50 years, stand as chilling bookends to the 20th century, each representing a different kind of nightmare for the families left pleading for answers. The first mystery unfolds on a snowy Christmas Eve in 1945 in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder were raising their 10 children in a tight-knit household filled with the usual chaos and love of a large family. That evening, after a holiday celebration, the parents and 4 of their children went to bed, while the 5 older children, Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, stayed up in the upstairs bedrooms. In the deep quiet of the night, a fire erupted with terrifying speed. Jenny Sodder was awakened by the smell of smoke and the sound of something hitting the roof. Rousing her husband, they managed to escape with 4 of the children, fighting through the flames and smoke. In the chaos, they assumed the 5 older children had found their own way out. But as they stood in the freezing cold, watching their home be consumed by an inferno, a horrifying realization set in. The 5 children were nowhere to be found. The official investigation that followed was swift and, to the Sodders, shockingly inadequate. The fire chief declared the blaze an accident, likely caused by faulty wiring in the attic. The next day, authorities sifted through the still smoldering ashes and reported finding nothing but a few charred bones and some organ tissue, which they claimed were the remains of the missing children. They were quickly buried, but for George and Jenny Sodder, nothing about this added up. Their home had been constructed largely of fire-resistant materials, and they knew that a fire hot enough to cremate 5 bodies completely would have had to burn for an incredibly long time at an extreme temperature, yet their house had been reduced to ash in under an hour. More baffling still, when George Sodder returned to the site with a magnet, he found it attracted numerous small, melted blobs of metal scattered in the debris. He became convinced this was thermite, a highly flammable incendiary compound, suggesting the fire may have been deliberately set. The inconsistencies only multiplied. A neighbor claimed to have seen the children peering from a passing car early on Christmas morning, looking frightened. Another reported hearing a loud bang, like an object striking the roof, just before the fire started, a detail that aligned with the family's own experience and pointed to a possible explosive. Most haunting of all was the discovery, made by the Sodders themselves when they were finally allowed to properly search the site, that the children's remains were simply not there. The bones found by the sheriff were later examined by a funeral director who stated they were not human at all, but likely pieces of animal vertebrae. The case transformed from a tragic accident into a potential abduction. The Sodders dedicated the rest of their lives and their life savings to searching for their children, hiring private investigators, following leads across the country, and even publishing their story in newspapers. They received a mysterious photograph in the mail years later, purportedly of their son Louis as a young man, but it could never be verified. The question remains, was the fire a cover for a kidnapping? If so, by whom and why? The Sodder children disappearance is a story of a family's unyielding love clashing with official incompetence and a complete absence of closure, a Christmas Eve tragedy that never found an end. From the fiery chaos of a West Virginia home, we travel to a seemingly ordinary house in Springfield, Missouri, in the early summer of 1992, where a disappearance occurred that was marked not by fire but by an eerie and absolute silence. On June 7th, two recent high school graduates, Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall, spent the night celebrating their commencement. After a party, they decided to stay at the home of Suzanne's mother, Cheryl Levitt. The three women were last seen alive in the early hours of June 8th. The next day, friends and family arrived at the house to find a scene of profound mystery. The women were gone. Stacy and Suzanne had planned to go to a water park that morning, but they never arrived. Their purses, lined up neatly on the living room floor, still contained their money, cigarettes, and keys. Cheryl's car was parked outside. A broken porch light globe lay on the ground, but there was no other sign of a struggle. It was as if the three women had simply vanished into thin air. The case of the Springfield Three is particularly baffling to investigators because of what is absent. There were no forced entry signs, no evidence of a violent confrontation, and no clear motive. The house was tidy, with a half-finished cup of coffee on the counter. The only potential clue was an ominous message left on the home's answering machine. When friends checked it the next day, they heard a male voice making a threatening, slurred statement, followed by a crash. The call was traced to a construction site payphone, but it led nowhere. The sheer normality of the scene is what makes it so terrifying. This was not a remote cabin or a crime-ridden neighborhood. It was a typical home where three women should have been safe. The theory that they were taken by someone they knew and trusted is compelling, as it would explain the lack of a struggle. But who could have overpowered three people simultaneously without leaving a trace? Other theories range from a botched burglary that turned into an abduction to the possibility of a connection to local drug activity, though no solid evidence has ever emerged to support any single scenario. What binds the Sodder case and the Springfield Three together is the agonizing lack of resolution and the enduring hope of the families. In both instances, the official investigations have long since gone cold, but the questions burn as hot as ever. For the Sodders, the mystery was fueled by evidence that pointed away from a simple accident, suggesting a darker human hand at work. For the friends and family of the Springfield Three, the mystery is rooted in the utter void of evidence, a crime scene that offers no hints, only a silent, empty house. One case is defined by the presence of suspicious clues, the other by their complete absence. Both stand as stark reminders that in our modern world, with all its technology and connectivity, people can still disappear without a trace, leaving behind only grieving families and a mystery that time has not been able to solve. From the heart-wrenching personal tragedies of unexplained disappearances, we pivot to a pair of American mysteries that captivate not because of the human lives they affected, but because of the profound questions they raise about the artifacts we leave behind. These are objects and structures that stand as silent, stubborn challenges to our accepted historical timelines, beginning with a creation of such stunning clarity and beauty that it seemed to whisper secrets of a lost world. The story of the crystal skulls, particularly the most famous one known as the Mitchell-Hedges skull, is a classic tale of archaeological wonder crashing headlong into modern scientific scrutiny. Imagine a life-sized human skull carved from a single, perfectly clear block of rock crystal. Its surfaces are smooth and polished to an impossible degree, with a detached mandible that fits so precisely it seems to move with a life of its own. This was the artifact that adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges claimed his daughter, Anna, discovered while exploring the ancient Maya city of Lubonton in Belize in the 1920s. The story was irresistible, a masterpiece of Mesoamerican artistry, a relic of a bygone age that might have been used by high priests for divination or ceremonial purposes. Its proponents argued that the carving was so perfect, with no visible tool marks, that it must have been the work of ancient artisans who possessed lost technologies, spending generations patiently rubbing the crystal into shape with sand and water. The skull became an icon of the alternative archaeology movement, a symbol of ancient mystery and unexplained genius. However, the romantic narrative began to fracture under the cold, hard light of scientific analysis. When researchers were finally allowed to examine the skull with modern tools like scanning electron microscopes, a different story emerged. The fine, precise markings on the crystal were found to be consistent with the rotary wheels and polishing compounds used in 19th century European jewelry workshops, not with hand tools available to the Maya. Furthermore, the type of rock crystal was traced to sources more likely accessible in Europe than in Central America. The most damning evidence came from the lack of any archaeological context. No similar skulls had ever been found in a documented, undisturbed ancient burial site. The overwhelming consensus today is that the Mitchell-Hedges skull, along with other famous examples in the British Museum and the Smithsonian, are clever fakes, likely crafted in Germany or France between 1860 and 1890. They were products of an era fascinated by the exoticism of ancient civilizations, created to satisfy a wealthy collector's market. Yet, even with this debunking, a sliver of mystery remains. If they are 19th century fakes, who exactly made them and for what specific purpose? Were they intended as elaborate hoaxes from the start, or were they simply beautiful works of art, inspired by a mix of genuine Aztec and Maya iconography that featured skulls never meant to be passed off as truly ancient? The skill required to create them was, and still is, remarkable. The mystery of the crystal skulls thus transforms from a question of ancient origins to a puzzle of modern motivation, a reminder that the desire to believe in a mysterious past can sometimes be powerful enough to create the very artifacts we wish to find. While the crystal skulls represent a mystery of artistic origin, our next enigma is one of sheer, anonymous labor etched into the New England landscape. Scattered throughout the woods of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont, often hidden beneath a canopy of dense forest, lie thousands of stone structures known collectively as the Mystery Walls or America's Stonehenge. These are not simple colonial field walls built by farmers clearing land. They are complex arrangements of massive stone slabs, forming low tunnels, chamber-like enclosures, and standing stones that sometimes align with celestial events like the solstices. The most famous site is in Salem, New Hampshire, a sprawling complex of stone-walled chambers, niches, and what appears to be a sacrificial table with grooved channels, all perched on a rocky hilltop. The central question is as straightforward as it is difficult to answer: who built these walls and when? The conventional explanation, long held by historians, attributes them to 17th and 18th century European settlers. In this view, the structures are simply root cellars, animal pens, or the foundations of early colonial buildings that have since rotted away. The stones were cleared from fields to make way for agriculture, and the more complex chambers could have been used for cold storage. The celestial alignments, skeptics argue, could be coincidental, or perhaps were noted and utilized by practical-minded farmers for marking the seasons. But for many, the colonial farmer theory feels insufficient. The construction techniques, using massive stones weighing several tons fitted together without mortar, seem unnecessarily monumental for a simple root cellar. The layouts are often too complex and ritualistic in feeling. This has given rise to a much more controversial theory that these structures are pre-Columbian, evidence of transoceanic contact long before Columbus. The most popular candidate for the builders are Celtic voyagers from Europe, perhaps Irish monks led by the legendary Saint Brendan, who is said to have sailed across the Atlantic in the 6th century. Proponents of this Celtic connection point to the striking similarity between the New England structures and ancient stone souterrains found in Ireland and Scotland. They argue that the alignments are too precise to be accidental, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of astronomy that colonial farmers would not have possessed. Other, more fringe theories have suggested the Phoenicians or even refugees from the lost city of Atlantis. the debate is complicated by a frustrating lack of definitive archaeological evidence. Organic materials that could be carbon dated have rarely been found in direct association with the walls. The sites have been disturbed by centuries of activity, from colonial farming to 20th century treasure hunters. Modern archaeological investigations have yielded a mix of artifacts from pre-colonial stone tools to 18th century pottery, making it difficult to pinpoint a single period of construction. The most likely scenario may be the most complex one, that these sites have a layered history. Perhaps they were indeed sacred or significant sites for indigenous American peoples who built initial structures. Then, centuries later, European settlers arrived, recognized the strategic or symbolic importance of the location, and reused the stones, adding their own walls and chambers and obscuring the original purpose. The mystery walls of New England stand not as a single puzzle with one solution, but as a palimpsest of American history, where different cultures have left their mark on the same landscape, creating a tangled legacy of stone that continues to challenge our understanding of who walked these woods and when. But for every mystery anchored in a specific place or object, some of history's most captivating puzzles are embodied in individuals who stepped onto the stage of history with no clear origin story, their lives and deaths forever shrouded in speculation. Nowhere is this more evident than in the contrasting tales of two legendary figures from the heart of Europe. One a charismatic aristocrat who claimed immortality, the other a feral child who seemed to have no past at all. First, picture the glittering, candlelit salons of 18th century Paris and Vienna. In this world of powdered wigs and intricate court politics, a man known as the Comte de Saint-Germain cut a truly extraordinary figure. He was a virtuoso violinist, a gifted painter, a charming conversationalist fluent in a dozen languages, and a purported alchemist who claimed the secret to transmuting base metals into gold. But his most astonishing claim was his age. He openly spoke of personal friendships with figures who had lived centuries before, recounting detailed conversations with the Queen of France from the 1500s as if they had happened yesterday. When politely challenged on his longevity, he would merely smile and offer cryptic hints, suggesting he was an immortal adept, a master of ancient esoteric secrets. His appearance fueled the legend. Despite being active in European courts from the 1740s through the 1780s, contemporaries consistently described him as a man who looked no older than 45, with a vibrant energy and a seemingly ageless vitality. The mystery of Saint-Germain begins with the complete absence of any verifiable record of his birth, parents, or nationality. He simply appeared fully formed and impossibly sophisticated. He moved with ease among kings and philosophers, funded by an unknown source of immense wealth that allowed him to wear diamonds as everyday accessories and offer priceless jewels as gifts to nobles. He dabbled in diplomacy, acting as a secret agent for the French crown, and his knowledge of chemistry led to innovations in dyeing fabrics. Yet, whenever his past was probed, he would deflect with a charming anecdote from the time of the Romans. His death is as obscure as his birth. Some accounts say he died in the German town of Eckernförde in 1784, while others insist he was spotted attending a Masonic conference in the 1790s and was even seen in Paris decades later during the Revolution. The Comte de Saint-Germain is the ultimate self-created enigma, a man who wove his own legend so skillfully that he became a permanent fixture in the mythology of the occult. A ghost in the machine of the Enlightenment who seems to wink at us from the pages of history, forever daring us to uncover his secret. From the polished, self-assured mystery of the Comte, we plunge into a story of brutal deprivation and profound innocence. On May 26, 1828, the quiet town of Nuremberg, Germany, was confronted with a sight that defied explanation. A teenage boy, stumbling and barely able to walk, was found clutching a letter addressed to a local cavalry captain. He could only speak a few painfully learned phrases, most notably, "I want to be a horseman like my father," and seemed to have no understanding of the world around him. His name, given in the letter, was Kaspar Horsa. The letter itself was mysterious, claiming the boy had been raised in total isolation since 1812 and was now being sent to join the army. A second note found in his possession, supposedly written by his mother, offered a different, even more tragic story, stating he was a child given to a poor laborer after his father, a cavalryman, had died. Kaspar's condition was horrifying. He was terrified of light, recoiled from most foods except bread and water, and was fascinated by the flickering of a candle as if seeing magic for the first time. He had the mental capacity of a young child, yet he learned with astonishing speed. Under the care of a kind professor, he began to acquire language and tell fragments of his story. He described being kept for years in a dark, tiny cell, where he never saw the face of the man who fed him a diet of bread and water and who taught him only the few phrases he knew. He had no concept of other people, of animals, or of the world outside his prison. His emergence into Nuremberg was like a visitor from another planet arriving on Earth. Naturally, the question on everyone's mind was, who was Kaspar Horsa really? The most tantalizing theory, which he himself came to believe, was that he was the hereditary Prince of Baden, switched at birth with a dying baby and secretly imprisoned to prevent him from claiming the throne. This would explain the meticulous effort to keep him alive yet utterly ignorant. Proponents of this theory point to the strange timing of deaths in the Baden royal line and the curious interest certain powerful figures took in suppressing inquiries into Kaspar's origins. However, this royal birth theory is fiercely disputed by historians who find the evidence circumstantial and the logistics of such a cover-up implausible. They suggest he was likely the victim of a simpler, if equally cruel, crime, perhaps the illegitimate son of a noblewoman hidden away to avoid scandal, or simply a developmentally disabled child abandoned by a desperate family. The mystery deepened into tragedy 5 years after his appearance. In October of 1833, Kaspar Horsa staggered home with a deep stab wound to his chest. He claimed a mysterious stranger had lured him to a park, given him a purse, and then stabbed him. The purse contained a cryptic note written in mirror writing, warning that Horsa would be able to tell the stranger's identity because he came from the Bavarian border. Kaspar died 3 days later. Was it murder or, as some officials suspected, a complicated suicide? Had his true identity finally caught up with him, silencing a living secret? The story of Kaspar Horsa is the polar opposite of the Saint Germain legend. One man cultivated an aura of ancient wisdom and power. The other was a blank slate, a vessel for the projections and conspiracies of others. Saint Germain's mystery was one of flamboyant excess. Horsa's was one of heartbreaking absence, a life stolen before it could even begin, leaving behind a legacy of pain and unanswered questions about the depths of human cruelty. But from the self-fashioned mystery of the Comte de Saint Germain and the tragic blank slate of Kaspar Horsa, we now confront two modern enigmas where the identities were not cultivated or stolen, but were systematically erased by the individuals themselves, leaving behind only a trail of cryptic clues and a profound, chilling silence. These cases, emerging from the aftermath of the Second World War, pull us into the shadowy world of international espionage, where a single life can be a disposable asset and the truth is the first casualty. Our first stop is a tranquil beach in Adelaide, Australia, on the 1st of December 1948. It was a summer morning, and the scene was one of postcard perfection until two joggers made a grim discovery. A well-dressed man was lying propped against the seawall, his head resting peacefully on the granite as if he were simply taking a nap. He was in excellent physical condition, dressed in a suit and tie with polished shoes. There was no sign of a struggle, and the initial assumption was that he had suffered a heart attack. But this was no ordinary death. In his pockets, investigators found a train ticket, a bus ticket, chewing gum, a comb, and a pack of cigarettes, but no wallet, no identification, and the labels had been carefully cut out of all his clothing. A routine post-mortem examination then delivered the first major shock. The man had not died of natural causes. The coroner discovered that his spleen was massively enlarged and his liver was congested with blood, symptoms consistent with a powerful, fast-acting poison for which there was no known antidote at the time. The official cause of death was recorded as poisoning, but whether it was suicide or murder was impossible to determine. The mystery, however, was only beginning. Months later, during a second investigation, a tiny, rolled-up scrap of paper was discovered hidden in a small fob pocket sewn into the man's trousers. When carefully unfolded, it revealed two words printed in tiny letters, tamam shud. This phrase, meaning ended or finished in Persian, was the final line of a collection of poems called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The police launched a public appeal, and remarkably, a man came forward with a rare first edition of the book. He explained that he had found it tossed on the back seat of his car, which had been parked near the beach the night the body was discovered. In the back of this book, detectives found a series of unbreakable codes, lightly penciled in what appeared to be a form of shorthand, along with a phone number. The number belonged to a former nurse who lived near the beach. She recalled that a mysterious man had called her several times, but she had never seen his face and could not identify the body. She did, however, mention that around the time of the man's death, she had seen a man fitting his description lying on the beach, seemingly asleep, and she had seen another man dragging him by the legs. This witness account suggested a possible accomplice or an assailant, but it was never corroborated. The Tamam Shud case, also known as the mystery of the Summiten Man, is a Russian nesting doll of unanswered questions. Who was this impeccably dressed man? The most persistent theory is that he was a Cold War spy. The use of a rare literary phrase, the complex code, the methodical removal of all identifying marks, and the use of an untraceable poison all point towards a professional intelligence agent who had been caught or had chosen to end his own life. The nurse he contacted may have been his local handler. The code in the book has resisted every attempt at decryption by military and civilian codebreakers for over 70 years, a testament to its sophistication. A more recent theory, fueled by modern DNA analysis and a persistent researcher, suggests the man may have been a lost loved child from a prominent local family, his death the result of a private tragedy rather than an international conspiracy. Yet without a name or a cracked code, his story remains frozen in that moment on the beach, a man who finished his business with the world, leaving behind only two cryptic words as his final epitaph. Just over 2 decades later, and halfway across the world, a similar scene of erasure played out in the stark, beautiful wilderness of Norway. In November of 1970, a man hiking through the Isdalen Valley, a remote area near the city of Bergen, stumbled upon the burned remains of a woman. The scene was horrifying and meticulously staged. Her body was surrounded by an array of personal effects: a handbag, a watch, a fur hat, empty bottles of liquor, and a plastic water bottle, all arranged as if for a picnic, but then doused with gasoline and set ablaze. The fire had been so intense that her fingerprints were destroyed and her teeth were damaged, making identification through conventional means nearly impossible. This was the Isdal woman, a mystery that would plunge Norwegian authorities into one of their most complex and haunting investigations. The investigation revealed a person who was a ghost in life as much as in death. All the labels had been carefully removed from her clothing, much like the Summiten Man. The serial numbers had been scraped off her luggage, but unlike the Australian case, the Isdal woman left a much wider, though equally deceptive, trail. Painstaking detective work traced her movements across Europe in the months leading up to her death. She had used at least 8 different aliases, carrying multiple fake passports and large amounts of cash in various currencies. She was a chameleon, constantly changing her appearance, dyeing her hair, and wearing wigs. She was fluent in several languages, including English, French, and German, but with a faint accent that some listeners thought might be Flemish or Eastern European. She stayed in budget hotels, always paying in cash, and her behavior was deliberately anonymous. Witnesses described her as nervous and secretive, often seen burning papers in her hotel room sink before checking out. The evidence overwhelmingly pointed to one profession: espionage. Norway during the Cold War was a strategically critical NATO member, sharing a long border with the Soviet Union. The Istel woman's movements coincided with locations of military and scientific significance. The prevailing theory is that she was a courier or an agent for a foreign intelligence service, possibly running a network of sources or transporting sensitive information. Her death, officially ruled a suicide by the police, is deeply suspicious. The arranged scene with the bottles of liquor suggests a possible attempt to stage a drunken accident or suicide, but the use of gasoline and the remote location feel more like a professional killing designed to eliminate a compromised asset and destroy any evidence of her identity. Had her cover been blown, was she eliminated by her own handlers to prevent capture or by a rival agency? The most haunting clue was the discovery of a prescription cream in her luggage, used to treat a chronic skin condition called psoriasis. This small, personal detail humanizes the phantom, a reminder that beneath the layers of false identities was a real person with a very real, mundane ailment, a tiny crack in her expertly constructed facade. Together, the Tamam Shud case and the Istel woman represent the ultimate cold cases of the modern era. They are not puzzles of ancient history, but crimes etched into the recent past, investigations that should have had all the advantages of modern forensics. Yet they remain stubbornly unsolved because the subjects were masters of anonymity. One man left a single, poetic clue that has defied interpretation. One woman left a tangled web of false identities that ultimately led nowhere. They are cautionary tales from the front lines of the Cold War, reminding us that in the clandestine world of spies and secrets, the most successful operatives are those who leave no story behind at all, their lives and deaths becoming just another file in a locked cabinet, a permanent question mark in the archives of history. From the shadowy world of Cold War espionage and erased identities, we now turn to a conflict that was anything but covert, a military campaign that was utterly absurd, completely public, and resulted in one of the most humiliating defeats in modern history, all at the hands of a formidable enemy, large, flightless birds. After the First World War, the Australian government, eager to support veterans, established a soldier settlement scheme in the Campion district of Western Australia. The plan was to turn soldiers into wheat farmers, granting them land to cultivate. But there was a factor the planners had grievously underestimated: the emu. These are not small creatures. An adult emu can stand over 6 feet tall, weigh more than 100 pounds, and run at speeds of 30 miles per hour. A population of around 20,000 of these birds, migrating from the arid interior toward the coast in search of water and food, discovered the veterans' freshly planted wheat fields. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet, and the emus descended upon the farms with devastating effect, trampling crops and breaking through fences with ease. The desperate farmers, seeing their livelihoods being consumed, appealed to the government for help. The Minister of Defense, a man named Sir George Pearce, saw an opportunity. Here was a chance to assist the veterans, provide live fire training for the military, and perhaps even secure some emu skins for hats. He approved a military operation, deploying 3 soldiers armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition under the command of Major G. P. W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery. Thus began the Great Emu War of 1932. The initial strategy was straightforward. The soldiers would herd the emus into a kill zone and mow them down with their superior firepower. The reality was a fiasco. The emus, far from being a disorganized mob, proved to be agile and intelligent adversaries. They split into small, scattered groups, making them difficult targets. The machine guns, which were prone to jamming, proved ineffective against the birds' hit-and-run tactics. After the first engagement, Major Meredith reported with a mixture of frustration and respect that each pack seemed to have its own leader. A giant black-plumed bird that stood sentinel and whistled a warning, sending the flock scattering into the scrub with remarkable speed. The operation stretched on for weeks, becoming a source of national ridicule. Newspaper cartoons depicted the army being bested by the birds, and politicians questioned the sanity of the endeavor. After a month, having expended thousands of rounds of ammunition for a confirmed kill count of fewer than 1,000 emus, the military was forced to retreat. The emus had won. The government officially withdrew its forces, much to the delight of the press and the dismay of the farmers. The whole affair stands as a hilarious yet insightful lesson in the law of unintended consequences. It was a stark reminder that nature cannot be subdued by sheer force alone, and that underestimating your opponent, even if that opponent is a bird, can lead to a spectacular and unforgettable defeat. If the Emu War was a comedy of errors played out under the bright Australian sun, our next event is a spectacle of mystery that unfolds under the cover of night on the waters of Southeast Asia. Every year, on the night of the full moon at the end of the Buddhist Lent, a strange and beautiful phenomenon occurs on the Mekong River, which forms the border between Thailand and Laos. From the dark depths of the river, glowing red-orange fireballs, ranging in size from tiny sparks to basketballs, silently rise into the air. They can ascend hundreds of feet before vanishing without a trace, without smoke, sound, or smell. This is the phenomenon of the Naga fireballs, and it draws thousands of spectators to the riverbanks each year, a mix of devout believers and curious skeptics hoping to witness the event for themselves. The local folklore provides a captivating explanation deeply rooted in the region's culture. The legend tells of Phaya Naga, a mythical serpent deity believed to dwell in the Mekong. The fireballs are said to be the breath of the Naga, rising to pay homage to the Lord Buddha as he ended his spiritual retreat and descended back to earth. For many locals, this is not a matter of debate. The fireballs are a sacred manifestation, a sign of the Naga's presence and a reaffirmation of their faith. The atmosphere on the riverbank is one of festival and reverence, a communal experience that strengthens cultural identity. Science, however, offers a more terrestrial, though no less fascinating, explanation. The leading theory points to the riverbed itself. The Mekong is rich in organic sediment, and as this material decomposes, it can produce methane and phosphine gases. These gases, trapped in bubbles under the riverbed, could be ignited spontaneously by conditions on the river's surface. Phosphine, in particular, is known to ignite upon contact with air, creating a brief, bright flash. The specific timing could be related to the alignment of the sun and moon, which might influence the temperature of the water and the sediment, triggering the release of the gas bubbles. It is, in essence, a large-scale, naturally occurring version of lighting a fart, a comparison that, while crude, captures the basic chemical process. Yet, the scientific explanation is not without its holes. Skeptics have proposed that the entire event could be an elaborate hoax, with locals on the Laos side of the river firing tracer, rounds or flares into the sky to perpetuate the myth and boost tourism. While some investigations have supported the phosphine theory, the consistency of the event's timing and the sheer number of fireballs reported each year make a purely human orchestrated deception difficult to prove conclusively. The true nature of the Naga fireballs likely lies somewhere in the space between faith and physics. They are a perfect example of how a natural phenomenon can be interpreted through a cultural lens, transforming a possible chemical reaction into a moment of spiritual wonder. Whether they are the breath of a mythical serpent or the glow of burning swamp gas, the fireballs of the Mekong continue to captivate all who see them, a mysterious celebration of light that bridges the gap between the known world and the realm of legend. And so we arrive at the final, chilling stop on our journey through history's greatest enigmas, a case that has become the very archetype of the unsolved murder, a name whispered for over a century that still sends a shiver down the spine: Jack the Ripper. Our setting is the autumnal gloom of 1888, in the impoverished, gaslit labyrinth of London's Whitechapel district. This was a world of crushing poverty, where narrow, foggy alleys were crowded with the desperate and the destitute. It was onto this stage of human misery that a predator emerged, whose actions would not only terrorize a city, but would forever change the nature of criminal investigation and public fascination with evil. The canonical series of murders attributed to Jack the Ripper began on August 31st with the killing of Mary Nichols. Her body was found in the early hours on a squalid street, her throat savagely cut and her abdomen mutilated with what appeared to be surgical skill. The brutality was shocking, but it was only a prelude. The killer's violence escalated with each victim: Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The murders shared a horrifying signature: deep throat wounds, followed by extensive and systematic mutilation of the abdominal area, with several organs skillfully removed and taken away by the killer. The final attack on Mary Kelly, which occurred inside her small rented room, was one of such overwhelming savagery that it surpassed all that had come before, leaving seasoned police officers physically sickened. The Ripper was not just killing, he was dissecting, displaying a knowledge of human anatomy that suggested a background in medicine or butchering, and he was operating with a chilling confidence in the heart of one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. Adding a terrifying new dimension to the crimes was the correspondence. In late September, a letter arrived at the Central News Agency, written in red ink and dripping with taunting arrogance. It was signed Jack the Ripper. The name, instantly seized upon by the press, created the monster's public persona. But it was the "From Hell" letter, received by George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, that truly plunged the investigation into the realms of Gothic horror. This letter, cruder and more menacing than the others, was accompanied by a small box. Inside was half of a human kidney, purportedly taken from Catherine Eddowes, with the writer claiming he had fried and ate the other half. Whether these letters were genuine communications from the killer or the work of macabre hoaxers is a debate that continues to this day, but they succeeded in their primary effect. They turned a local murder spree into a media firestorm that captivated and horrified the entire British Empire. The police investigation, led by Frederick Aberline, was massive and frantic, but it was hamstrung by the limitations of Victorian forensics and the chaotic environment of Whitechapel. Suspects were numerous and varied, each with their own compelling yet fatally flawed narrative. One of the most persistent suspects was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant who lived in the area and was later committed to an asylum. He was named as the prime suspect by several high-ranking officers in their private memoirs, and modern DNA analysis on a shawl allegedly found at one of the crime scenes has been controversially linked to his descendants. However, the provenance of the shawl is highly questionable, and the evidence remains deeply contentious. Then there was Montague Drute, a young barrister and teacher with a history of mental instability in his family, who drowned himself in the River Thames shortly after the last murder. His timing made him a convenient suspect for those who believed the killer had died or been institutionalized, but there is no direct evidence linking him to the crimes. The list of suspects reads like a roll call of Victorian society's dark underbelly. There was Francis Tumblety, a misogynistic American quack doctor who was arrested but jumped bail, Michael Ostrog, a violent Russian criminal and confidence man, and even Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria, in a conspiracy theory that suggests the murders were covered up to hide a royal scandal. The problem with every single theory is the same, a tantalizing thread of circumstantial evidence, but never a smoking gun. The suspect pool is so vast and the facts so murky that the Ripper could have been almost anyone, a local tradesman, a traveling slaughterman, or a gentleman who moved unseen between the squalor of the East End and the comfort of the West. This leads to the ultimate question: why, with all our modern technology, does the case remain unsolved? The answer lies in the forensic void. The crime scenes were contaminated by well-meaning but untrained constables and curious onlookers. Potential evidence was washed away by rain or simply not recognized. There are no uncontaminated DNA samples from a definitive source like the Ripper's letters that can be reliably tested. The killer left behind no clear fingerprints, no distinctive fibers, and no eyewitness ever provided a description that led to a conclusive identification. He was a phantom who exploited the darkness, the social chaos, and the limitations of his time. Jack the Ripper endures not just because of the brutality of his crimes, but because of his perfect anonymity. He is a shadow that stepped out of the fog, committed acts of unimaginable horror, and then stepped back into the darkness, leaving behind only a legacy of questions, a gallery of suspects, and a name that has become synonymous with the unknown evil that can walk among us utterly unseen. Yet the true legacy of Jack the Ripper is not confined to the cobblestone alleys of Whitacapel. His most profound impact was on the human imagination itself, effectively creating the blueprint for the modern archetype of the serial killer. Before 1888, murder was often seen as a crime of passion or profit, a brutal but understandable act. The Ripper introduced a new, terrifying concept to the public consciousness: the killer who murders for the sheer, incomprehensible pleasure of it, a predator who selects strangers as his prey and whose violence is not a means to an end but the end itself. This notion of motiveless malignancy, of evil for its own sake, was a seismic shift that would go on to shape an entire genre of literature and film. The fictional detectives who emerged in his wake, from Sherlock Holmes to Hercule Poirot, often grappled with villains whose psychological complexity mirrored the dark puzzle the Ripper presented. The entire framework of the true crime genre, with its obsession with criminal profiling, crime scene analysis, and the hunt for a hidden monster, can trace its roots directly back to the frantic, fruitless search for the man in the shadows. This cultural fascination manifests most visibly in the very streets where the terror unfolded. Today, London's East End has been transformed, yet it capitalizes on its grim history through a bustling industry of Ripper tourism. Guided walks lead visitors along the same routes the victims walked, pausing at the sites of the murders, now marked only by memory and the occasional plaque. Pubs that once served the women he killed now proudly advertise their connection to the legend. This macabre form of heritage is a double-edged sword. It brings economic life to the area, but also raises ethical questions about profiting from the brutalization of impoverished women. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our collective memory has, to a large extent, immortalized the killer while often reducing his victims to mere footnotes in his story. The name Jack the Ripper echoes through history, while the names Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly are whispered far less often, a testament to how the narrative of monstrous genius can overshadow the simple, human tragedy at its core. So why, after more than a century, does this particular mystery exert such a powerful grip on us? The answer lies in the perfect storm of its components. It is a puzzle with just enough pieces to suggest a solution is possible, but with the most critical pieces permanently missing. The foggy, gaslit Victorian setting provides a timelessly Gothic backdrop that feels both historical and strangely fictional. The killer's taunting communication with the press introduced an interactive, almost theatrical element to the crimes, making the public feel like active participants in the hunt. And perhaps most importantly, the absence of a definitive culprit creates a vacuum that our curiosity is compelled to fill. A solved case has an ending. It's a story that can be closed and put on a shelf. But an unsolved mystery is a story without a final chapter, an open invitation for every generation to pick up the clues and try their hand at being the detective who finally cracks the case. This has led to an unending stream of new theories, each reflecting the anxieties and technologies of its time. The 20th century favored grand conspiracies, like the idea that the Ripper was Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, and that a high-level cover-up was orchestrated to protect the monarchy from scandal. This theory, while lacking credible evidence, taps into a deep-seated distrust of authority and a fascination with the misdeeds of the elite. In our modern, scientifically driven era, the focus has shifted to forensic solutions. Recent years have seen sensational claims based on DNA analysis of a shawl allegedly found near Catherine Eddowes' body, which researchers have linked to a suspect named Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who was later committed to an asylum. While this seems like the conclusive answer we've been waiting for, the evidence is fiercely debated. The provenance of the shawl is uncertain, and the DNA techniques used are controversial, leaving many experts unconvinced. For every theory that names Kosminski, there is another that points to a different suspect from the vast and colorful list, from the misogynistic American quack Dr. Francis Tumblety to the unstable barrister Montague Drute. The enduring allure of Jack the Ripper, therefore, may ultimately depend on the mystery remaining unsolved. A conclusive answer, verified beyond any doubt, would satisfy our curiosity but would also kill the legend. The speculation, the debate, the endless re-examination of the facts, this is the lifeblood of the story. It allows us to project our own fears and fantasies onto the blank canvas of the killer's identity. He is a shapeshifter, becoming whatever we need him to be, a fallen aristocrat, a mad doctor, a foreign anarchist, or the boy next door. He represents the ultimate fear that the greatest horrors are not supernatural but human, and that they can walk among us hidden in plain sight. The shadow that fell over Whitaker in 1888 has never truly lifted because Jack the Ripper is no longer just a man. He is an idea, a permanent question mark in the annals of history, reminding us that some doors into the past are meant to remain forever closed. And so we have journeyed together through a gallery of ghosts of vanished civilizations, of silent ships, of unbreakable codes and unexplained lights in the sky. From the silent shores of Roanoke to the foggy alleyways of Whitaker, from the intricate gears of an ancient computer to the phantom signal from the depths of space, we have traced the outlines of history's most stubborn question marks. What ties these 50 puzzles together across centuries and continents is not a single thread of evidence but a powerful, unifying human emotion, an insatiable curiosity. These are not dead ends, they are open invitations. They remind us that history is not a dusty, closed book sitting on a shelf, but a vibrant, ongoing conversation. It is a living narrative where new discoveries, like the wreck of the Terror or a fresh look at a DNA sample, can suddenly cast an old mystery in a brilliant new light, forcing us to rewrite the chapters we thought we had finished. This relentless pursuit of the unknown is the very engine of progress. The desire to understand the Antikythera Mechanism pushes the boundaries of archaeology and engineering. The quest to decipher the Voynich Manuscript fuels advances in linguistic analysis and computing. The search for the truth behind the Dyatlov Pass incident drives us to better understand the brutal forces of nature and human psychology under extreme duress. These puzzles are not distractions from real science and history, they are their lifeblood. They challenge our assumptions, humble our expertise, and force us to ask better questions. They prove that the map of human knowledge is still being drawn, with vast, unexplored territories marked only by a tantalizing phrase, "Here be mysteries." And this is where you, the viewer, become a part of the story. History's greatest enigmas are not the sole property of experts in lab coats or tenured professors. They belong to anyone who has ever looked at a starry sky and wondered, or read an old story and felt a nagging doubt. So now we turn the investigation over to you. Which of these 50 mysteries captured your imagination the most? Does the fate of the Amber Room keep you awake at night, or are you convinced you have a new theory about the Springfield 3? Do you believe the answer to the wow? Signal is just beyond our current technology, or does the simple, tragic truth of the Flannan Isles lighthouse feel more compelling? The comments section is your laboratory, your detective's notebook. Share your thoughts, your own research, the local legend from your part of the world that nobody can explain. Let's continue this conversation together. If this journey into the unexplained has sparked your curiosity, then you are exactly the kind of explorer we make these videos for. Consider subscribing to the channel and ringing the notification bell, because this is just the beginning. Our next adventure will take us deep into the world of lost cities, mythical creatures, and scientific anomalies that defy all logic. The past is waiting to give up its secrets, and the greatest mysteries are still out there waiting to be solved. Thank you